Denise Campos.
Here.
Tian Fang.
Here.
Brett Gladstone.
Here.
Pascual Gutierrez.
Here.
Sylvia Kwan.
Here.
Ebony Lewis.
Here.
Robert Perman.
Here.
Nilsa Serrano here. Sunny Ward.
Here.
Okay. All members are present to meet at the forum. And I just have a few. Sorry. Few brief procedural remark. First of all, as we point out, the meeting is being webcasted. And then we have a guest from, should we call you guest, from DCA's new director. We also have Andy Bowden, which is a LATC member, joining us. Welcome, Andy. Good for having you sit in. And in interest of a time, I would like just to invite Kimberly, maybe have a seat. And Kimberly is Kirchmeier is the new director of DCA. She's kind enough to make some time to give us a brief overview of the current work of DCA. Kimberly, why don't you get started? Okay.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here today, members and Executive Officer Zuniga. I've known Laura for a long time, so it's kind of nice to be here, sitting here with her. It's actually really, it is my pleasure to be here today, and I am the new director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, just a couple months in right now. But I just have to tell you, just introducing myself, DCA's been my home. So for those of you that may not know, I've actually been with DCA for 30 years. I always keep joking, it gets younger. I said I was 10, I'll say I'm 8 when I started here with you guys. But anyway, it really has been my home. I actually started out as a student assistant a long time ago at the Board of Cosmetology. It was then the Board of Cosmetology. Worked my way up through the ranks until I actually went to the medical board. And when I was at the medical board, I got an appointment as the deputy director over there. And not too long after that, a governor's appointment to DCA over here at headquarters as the Board and Bureau Relations deputy director. And then went back to the medical board. And just not too long after that, I was appointed as the executive director there. And that's where I've served for the last 6 years. So long time with the department, and just love working for the department. And the mission of Department of Consumer Affairs is consumer protection. That really goes to my heart, and that's why I've kind of probably stuck around for so long. But just giving you a little bit of some updates, I sent out actually an email to the department and to all of the staff, and it really kind of went over what my initial focus is going to be. And I just want to share that with the boards, just so you know where I'm going to be spending my energy and my focus. The first really is client services and satisfaction. I really believe that every position within the department plays a critical role in providing efficient quality services to the boards and bureaus, so they can in turn then provide the best experience to the licensees and the public. And I'm a true believer of customer service, and I really want to emanate that from the department to the boards and bureaus. Working smarter together, that we have a lot of talent within our department, and I think that if we work together creatively and collaboratively between the boards and bureaus, I'm confident that together we can, really just revamp the way that we do business and find efficiencies using just a team approach with the tools and technology that we have. And then the third thing is data transparency and action. And that's really using that data and technology to better inform our decision making. So our action plans are actually developed to drive down those licensing and enforcement timelines to provide measurable achievements. But really one thing I want to look at too is not, the department has always asked the boards and bureaus to provide information on how long it takes to take action against a licensee in your enforcement unit and also in your licensing unit. But I want to delve into the Department of Consumer Affairs. How long does it take us to process a package to hire an individual? How long does it take us to do a regulation package? How long does it take us to process a contract? Because those are all issues where I want to know internally how we're doing, because if those services aren't being done well, then we're not providing the service to the boards and bureaus. So we're going to be looking at finding ways to capture those timelines as well. So with all of those in mind, my main areas where I'm going to be really looking at is reducing the time frame for processing regulations. I know that this has been an issue, when I was at the medical board, it's been just a struggle with that long time frame to get the regulations through the process. So really looking at that and focusing on that timeline. Obtaining fiscal reports for the department. I don't know about this board, but that has been a struggle to know how much you're expending, how much revenue you're bringing in. And so we want to make sure that we have those reports for the boards and bureaus. I'll talk a little bit more about those too. Decreasing the time frame to perform investigations, that's another one that's important. And then working on ADA compliance. As all of you may know, the department has about 2 million pages that we need to bring into ADA compliance by the end of this year. And so we've been working on that and working with the boards and bureaus. And then also the last thing is really making sure that the legislation that gets passed is being implemented by the boards and bureaus. And so that's something I'll be working with our legislative affairs team and making sure that's happening. So really, I just want to let you know also that we are endeavoring to hold one-on-one meetings with all of the boards and bureaus, really to just learn more about their goals and the issues that you're facing. However, right now, I actually have a vacancy of about 6 positions in my executive team that are vacant. And so we're going to be waiting for those individuals to get in place before we actually will be meeting with the individuals, unless there's an urgent need, and then I've been meeting on a case-by-case basis. On January 22nd of 2020, Governor Newsom appointed Lourdes Castro Ramirez as the new Secretary of the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Previously, Ms. Castro Ramirez served as the president of the University Health Systems Foundation, and she's going to begin her position on Monday. So outgoing agency secretary Podesta has actually been appointed by Governor Newsom to the State Compensation Insurance Fund Board of Directors, and today is actually her last day, so it's a sad day for all of us. The department has been very fortunate to have Secretary Podesta serve these past few years, as her leadership really has guided the department through many significant changes that help benefit the consumers of California, and we want to thank her for her support and leadership and wish her the best in her next endeavor. And so it'll be interesting working with a new secretary, and we'll see what kind of their main focus is as she comes on board as well. So I talked a little bit about the regulation unit, but I want to give you an update on where we are. So as you may be aware, the DCA office has actually created a regulation unit to directly assist in the processing of departmental rulemaking proposals. In November, the regulation unit actually became fully staffed, and all DCA programs has been assigned a regulations attorney who will act as an assigned reviewer of proposed rulemaking packages. A large priority over the last few months obviously has been to implement AB 2138. That's the substantial relationship criteria. And so we've really been working on that so we can meet the goal of achieving full compliance, which is as of July 1st. And I know you all are going to be talking about that a little bit later. And then another step that we've taken to improve transparency and efficiency in processing those regulations is we're moving to a new database called ShareWell, and it's going to actually be able to track the submission of the regulations, so that the boards and bureaus will be able to put them into the system, and then you'll be able to see the status of those regulations as they move through the process. And we're actually working on development. We hope that we will have this by June, if not before. Fiscal reports update, we've actually had our budget office reach out to our Office of Information Services, that's our IT unit, and they're in a testing phase of a project that's going to allow the programs to access budget expenditure reports on a similar schedule as the previous aggregate expenditure reports we used to get through the CalSTAR system. Staff are utilizing this data that's extracted. We're bringing it from the FISCAL system, and we're putting it into what is the QBERT system. I know this board doesn't use Breeze, but for those of you that the boards and bureaus that had Breeze, we actually brought in QBERT so we could put all of the data in there and then extract reports. So we're using the same thing to get these FISCAL reports. And the hope is that these will be able to be run on demand. So anytime Ms. Zuniga wants to go in and pull those reports, she'll be able to get those out of the system. I've already talked about ADA compliance, but one thing I wanted to let you know is we will be hiring some student assistants in-house to be looking at all of those documents, and also hopefully hiring a contractor to help us in that. And we'll be working with Ms. Zuniga on all of the outstanding old documents, and then we'll also be looking to future documents. We want to make sure that the documents are ADA compliant before we post them, so we're looking at that right now as well. Yes. Yes. So yeah, absolutely. So it's on our website. So when when we're on the website, all of the documents that an individual goes to look at, they have to be ADA compliant. So if you have a vision impaired individual, it has to be able to be read through a reader. And so right
Okay.
now, if you look at a lot of our documents, just the way they're put together and the pictures that they have, if you were vision impaired, you wouldn't be able to use those documents. So we have to
I
move all
see.
of them into that process. And then the
So-
same thing with our webcasts. We actually have to have closed captioning now for our webcasts for the hearing impaired and looking at any disability that an individual may have.
Okay, so you said earlier about something about 20,000 pages or something.
It's actually 2 million pages
Ah.
for the department, a little bit more than that. But so we're finding ways to make those ADA compliant.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a lot. It'd be like all of your forms on your website, all of your disciplinary documents that are attached to a licensee. So all of those documents have to be able to be read by a screen reader.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's-
and that's to comply with the law. So it is a big project, but
Okay.
we are pretty certain we'll be able to meet the deadline of the end of this year.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And then just the last thing I did want to talk about is the department actually has an organizational improvement office. And this unit actually provides DCA programs with change management services, business process mapping, and information technology system requirement documentation. In addition, the unit provides collaborative consulting or process reengineering that maximizes the utilization of existing resources, improves productivity, and increases quality. And we've really split this unit up into two areas. And the first one is we've actually begun to review DCA centralized services. So that unit has actually already conducted these are legislatively mandated reviews of the department. And the first one they already completed was for Legal Affairs Division, and that one's actually done. We're working right now on the Division of Investigation, and that report is in its final stages. We hope that it will be actually approved, so it will be released in March. And then we're already working on the improvements based on the recommendations out of that report. We're looking also at our IT unit, basically on their service desk, and that report was we hope that will come out in the next few months. And then the last thing is we're looking at our Office of Human Resources, so that's our hiring unit. And so we're hoping that they can find ways to streamline that process where we can make our hires much more efficient. And then the last thing they're doing, which is one thing they're going to be working with this board on, is really they're working with 9 boards and bureaus to document and analyze their processes. And this work streamlines procedures, produces artifacts to help develop your IT system, and it will create new training tools. So this is the business modernization project that we'll be working on. So I think that covers all of my report. Regarding the executive officer salary study, I did want to just give an update on that. And we have actually put together a package for changes to that evaluation process and also the process to request salary increases for the executive officers based upon that study. And I'm hopeful that I'll be able to provide information at your next meeting on the outcome of that and what's going to happen with those new 2 processes. Okay, and with that, I open it up to any questions, and again, just thank you for having me here today.
Sorry, I keep forgetting. Any questions for Ms. Kirchmeier? If not, I have one. Yeah? Okay, I go first. So the work of compliance to translate the document into media for the different physically impaired group. Is this agency-wide? Is DCA work or assigned this board to do our document?
So we're doing 2 things actually to help the board. So the first one is we are going to hire these student assistants. So really Ms. Zuniga can have some of her staff do it, but what we're really looking to do is hire these student assistants so they can come in and they can work on those, and then also hiring a outside consultant because of the sheer volume, we're not going to be able to do this with internal resources. So we're going to hire a contractor that can help review those documents and get them out and make them ADA compliant.
And if we're hiring an external consultant, will be on our budget?
It will be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have to be finished by the end of
The end
2020?
of this year.
Okay. Thank
The
you.
one other thing that just to put out there too is we are asking the boards, and I know Ms. Zuniga's doing this probably with staff, is looking at what's out on your website to see if there's any documents that are very old and they're not used by the public. We don't want individuals to go in and just pull down data that is useful and needed and helpful for transparency, but we also don't need old documents or multiple versions of documents on your website. So that's kind of the review process we want everyone to go through.
That's very helpful. Good suggestion. Okay, I see, oh, good.
I just wanted to say that definitely anything you can do to help us with the streamlining of the regulatory approval process and also the hiring process would be appreciated, because that's been a real bugaboo, in my opinion.
Absolutely. We have a report actually that's going to be released today, just an update on a regulation unit. But I was really glad to see the statistics, being new and everything. I want everything to happen yesterday. And so it's been very difficult for me to, reel it in. I know, we've been in this situation, so we have to have time to get through. But I was actually really happy to look at, over the last 3 years, we had 21 packages that were noticed with OAL in 2018. We had 29 that were noticed in 2019, and just in the first 2 months of 2020, we've had 23 packages. So we're just 6 shorter in the first 2 months than we were before. Now, a lot of those are the 2138 regulations, but there's also been others that we've seen in that process. So we're hopeful that we can keep up with that volume, so we'll be able to have at least about 100 over the next year.
Do you mind if I have one?
Go ahead, yeah.
I just want to say, we're so happy to have Kim in this position, and I just felt such relief when she was appointed as director, and the department couldn't be in better hands. It's so great to work with her, so thank you for being here today.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I just wanted to let you know that as a board member, and I see how hard our staff works and what they do with so little, and I just wanted you to know that we, or me as a board member, have complete confidence in all they do on a everyday basis. They keep us informed, keep us in the loop, and never let anything get through. Thank you.
Thank you. And I couldn't say, the best thing to the director is if I never have to hear about the board, except for good accomplishments. And for this board, that is definitely the case. And you can have great confidence in your executive officer, because she has done a great job. So I know she's kind of new to this position too, but she's done a great job and kept you all off the radar. So that's always wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cambery, yeah. So we shifted the agenda a little bit. I'd like to invite our external guest to give us her viewpoint, her experience, and what's the practice to today in terms of building permit process. So she is the Deputy Chief Building Official, and her name is Roxana Racino Serna?
That's correct.
Okay, good. So, yeah. Why don't you get started? Yeah.
Good morning
Thank
to
you.
all of you. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come to the board here and on behalf of the City of Sacramento Building Division in the Community Development Department. My name is Roxana Recinos Serna. I am a recently appointed employee I'm a Deputy Chief Building Official for the Building Division, and I have been in this role since October of 2019. I will be speaking to you on my new role, the role of the Building Division and its enforcement of the building codes. It's not a dry subject, believe me. Okay, I want to start with my professional background, just to give you a little bit of information about me. I obtained a Bachelor of Architecture from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. After graduation, I joined a local municipality in the Bay Area at the Permit Center. This led me to other opportunities and interest in the regulatory portion of building codes, and rather than design. I was a plan checker for various municipalities, also in the Bay Area and in the Sacramento region, including West Sacramento, Elk Grove, the city of Dublin, and briefly in Palo Alto. My exposure was principally with building designers, professionals, architects, engineers, contractors, of course, and owners, homeowners, and business owners. In my current role as a Deputy Chief Building Official, my responsibilities are assisting the Chief Building Official in the planning, managing, and supervising of staff, I oversee the permit center and the field inspection. There are mid-level supervisors who are my direct leads in these two sections. There are approximately about 20 staff for the permit center and approximately 25 building inspectors for our department. We also hire private consultants when we have to, when we have a high load, which we hire contractors for the field inspection and also for plan review. So what is the role of a building department and building codes? The building division is within the Community Development Department, or CDD as we call it. It is comprised of the building, planning, code compliance, and animal care. By law, building departments regulate construction and development to safeguard and ensure the health and safety of the public. That is our motto. What requires a building permit? Well, it depends. For instance, for residential work, permits are triggered for additions, remodels, alterations, or simple appliance changeouts like your simple water heaters, air conditioners, let's see what else, and accessory structures such as a swimming pool or a gazebo or a detached garage, re-roofs, solar permits, etc. For commercial work, you basically need a permit just for about everything, unless it's a maintenance type of work. So those are the exempted items, but in general, everything is required or triggers a building permit. Now, who can apply for a permit? Well, anyone can apply for a permit. These can be your licensed contractors, designers, property owners, but those cannot be issued to just about anyone. Those can be applied for by anyone, but not necessarily issued. So where do you start your permitting process? This begins at the permit center. In our case, applicants apply or need to ensure that the projects also meet zoning and planning regulations and local ordinances, depending on the scope of the work. Applications are submitted and permits may be issued over the counter, depending if it's a small item, like your re-roof. Those can be issued at the counter. However, the larger or medium-sized projects may need to be reviewed, and perhaps the plans may be taken in for compliance and review. For instance, if you're doing an addition, or if you're doing a tenant improvement, or new multifamily, or new high-rise, of course, plans have to be submitted. Then it goes into the plan review process, where our plan checkers will review plans in accordance to the adopted local codes and state codes and federal codes. What exactly do plan checkers look for instance? Well, they will look at setback distances, for instance, for commercial and residential work. How far can you build to your property lines and to your main dwelling? What type of construction do you need? For commercial work, it will have to be either wood or, protected or steel. How many stories can you build? How much of a building can you have in your property? Depends on your lot and depends on the zoning regulations as well. We also look at assembly areas such as this. What am I looking for? Exits. How many exits? Illuminated signs. Panic hardware. Accessibility. Do you have lower counters? Do you have wide doors? What kind of hardware do you have? All of those things are looked at in the plan review process. We also look at site accessibility, number of parking lots, correct signage. We also look at life safety items. Do I need fire-rated partitions between certain areas? Assemblies versus offices? Yes. And let's see what else. We look at the minimum number of plumbing fixtures. How many do I need for this type of construction or this type of use? For residential, it's a little, slightly different, but the codes are still, we have different building codes and residential codes. So that's where you scope the project and see which which code will apply to your project. Architects and engineers are involved with ensuring that the plans also meet the state codes and federal codes. There are slight differences between the building code as far as accessibility and the ADA. If plans are found to lack the necessary code regulations, then the plan reviewers will make some correction, and then the notices are sent back to the designers. At that point, the designer will then make the necessary corrections to the plans and resubmit again. This cycle can go between one and I don't know how many cycles, depending on the extent of the project. Once the plans are deemed complete, they are stamped, The staff will then assess the fees if necessary, and the permits will be issued. Permits can only be issued to licensed contractors or property owners, or authorized agents for the property owners. No one else. These are not issued to professionals. After plans are approved, then can anyone begin construction with the plans while the plans are under review? No, you cannot. You have to wait until the permit is issued. After it's issued, then you can begin in scheduling the inspections. And what inspections would you be calling for? It depends on the scope of the work. If you have a simple residential work project, it can only take perhaps one inspection. If you have residential, a kitchen remodel, bathroom remodel, or an addition, it can take multiple inspections. For commercial, it's the whole gamut. It takes many inspections depending if it's on the floor basis, if it's a high-rise, or if it's a retail building. Our field inspectors will then inspect certain process, which could be the footing or foundation. It will then move to the frame inspection, lath inspection, rough electrical, mechanical, plumbing, gypsum board, and ultimately you would want to have a final inspection. Commercial projects are slightly different where they can apply for what it's known as a temporary certificate of occupancy, so that you can move in on certain occasions or to, for example, stock and train, and then you allow that tenant to move in and do just that. Then you still have some items to correct, and ultimately you would want a final certificate of occupancy. For residential work, it's different. You just want a final inspection. Let's see. What are the building codes? Who is responsible for enforcing the codes, and how often do these change? The California Building Standards Commission, within the umbrella of General Services, is the regulatory body responsible for adopting and proposing code changes. The commission has various code advisory committees, such as building, structural, green code, accessibility, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, etc. Then these committees then provide their recommendations and send them back to the commission for new code updates. These advisory committees then hold public meetings to the public and to the building industry and stakeholders interested in participating and proposing the code changes. Then the California Building Standards Code is the building code for California. It is a compilation of 3 types of standards. Number 1, the building standards adopted by state agencies such as OSHPD, the State Fire Marshal, Division of State Architect, or the California Energy Commission. The second type of standard is the one adopted from national model codes. What is this? These are the international codes, which are adopted generally by the other states in the U.S. However, being California, we need to modify that international code to our own specific local conditions, and that's what becomes the California Building Code. The third type of standard is the one approved by the California State Legislature, where special industries lobby for the passage of certain laws and programs, which then must be adopted locally and enforced. Think of these examples that just recently were approved by the California Legislature, such as the accessory dwelling units, which you might have heard by now, ADUs. So these are now allowed in single-family dwellings, right? So there are certain regulations, different laws which apply to a certain subject. By the way, this is not covered in the building code, it's the state law. So municipalities then must try to absorb, and because the ADUs have multiple laws that affect it, some deal with the entitlement process, some deal with impact fees, some deal with exempting parking lots, parking spaces, exempting sprinklers, fire sprinklers, etc. So municipalities then need to organize these different laws and make it so that applicants can understand them. Sometimes it's very difficult and challenging, but that's one way which can circumvent the typical review by the building standards. So we have those 3 examples. A new code went into effect on January 1 of this year, 2020, and the building code changes, and they're adopted every 3 years. They go through a triennial code adoption where the process, the review process and commentary starts all over again. So this is ongoing since a long time ago, but that is a process. I will share with you some statistics from our building department here in the city of Sacramento. Some performance measures based on the calendar year 2019. Let's see. We had about 130 total projects issued with a valuation of $1 million and greater. We had approximately $1.6 billion in total construction valuation issued for 2019. And as far as innovation, as of March of 2019, last year, all residential master plans have been submitted electronically, which is great. So that way you don't, master plans and subdivisions take up quite a bit of paper. So now we are requiring them to submit electronically. This saves a lot of paper. In 2019, we also started the unmanned aircraft systems drone inspections, which is going to be a program developed to perform solar inspections and rooftop inspections. It's not yet effective, but it is in the process. CDD also received and processed over 500 permit applications for production homes in the month of December alone. Over $500 million in construction valuation was received in the month of December only. Approximately 200 million of those was dedicated for the Major League Soccer Stadium. So this was a big record for us. Electronic plan check is now accepted for all types of projects. We usually get them mostly for commercial, not necessarily for residential, but it is now accepted. We also have some other permit programs that are making it, we're trying to provide an easy path for designers to submit. It's called Permit Simplicity and PASS, which is Pre-Qualified Architecture Submittal System. And these programs are meant so that they're pre-qualified architectural systems where designers complete a review and there's a participation list, and which ultimately will require fewer plan check reviews. And I also, on a daily basis, interact with other departments and the public. My typical day will consist of supervising, coordinating, and participating in the plan check process at the building counter, answering phone calls from applicants, developers on any range of level as far as where's my plan check, your inspector, I want clarification from the inspection today. Can you see what zoning code you have, et cetera. We'll also make recommendations, and we do research for our own elected officials in case where they're searching for the number of permits for their own district in the last year for single-family dwellings. So we need to compile that information and provide it to them as well. So that's a range of questions that come up on a daily basis. So this completes my presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Roxanne, for the a very nice overview. We have time for very brief questions and answers. So who wants to do the first one?
Go ahead.
I have my hand up.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Me too. Press the button.
Brett Gladstone, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I was wondering if you feel that architects in your jurisdiction know enough about ADUs, and is there any, if not, is there any education program to make architects aware of this great new resource for new housing?
Thank you for asking. Yes, we are at the moment compiling information. It's sort of a general, I would say, bulletin or cheat sheet, informational bulletin for our staff too, building and planning. We're trying to compile a document where we can tell a designer the major items that we will be looking at for ADUs. For instance, setback distances. What is the maximum size of an ADU? You can have up to 2 ADUs. What is the maximum size for that? Unfortunately, we have many laws that came into effect which deal with ADUs. Like I said earlier, one deals with impact fees, where we're going to exempt them for ADUs up to 750 square feet. What about the other one? Well, you will pay impact fees. What do I pay for? So that's the sort of document that we're trying to.
Thank you
compile.
very much.
So we have Denise, and afterwards Sylvia.
Thank you for an informative presentation. I wanted to ask how many of these practices that you explained are specific. Don't go into detail, but like how common is the practices that Sacramento uses for the whole building permit process as to cities across the state?
What do you mean? What process? Like the permit simplicity and those?
Right.
Well, they're available. Unfortunately, we don't see many designers seeking for these, but they have been available and they're in place.
As far as like this being a department within CDD for the city of Sacramento, is it the same across the board for cities across the state?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, building division is part of the community development department, yes.
Okay.
That is usually the I guess, hierarchy. So some community developments have the housing department in it. We have planning, building, even animal, but normally that doesn't happen in many, but this is unusual.
I had another question. What is the role of the planning department when it comes to seismic retrofitting?
I don't think there is any. Seismic retrofitting, when it comes to structurally speaking, I would say that it is a role of the building division where your engineer record may have to, provide some structural drawings and calculations, and that is strictly based on the building analysis. I don't think that has anything to do with the planning staff to review it, unless there is something attached or that is in parallel with facade improvement.
So like if a homeowner or business owner is going to do earthquake retrofitting or seismic retrofitting, they wouldn't apply for permits through?
It would.
Oh,
But
okay.
planning
Building
wouldn't
permit.
necessarily review it. Planning is mostly in zoning. They regulate the zoning, and building would regulate strictly the building code, which in this case it would be.
Okay.
The plan checkers will look at.
And one more quick question. You mentioned you have like a team of building inspectors. So in case of an emergency, when they go out and check the integrity of the buildings after some sort of disaster, is there a backup plan in case of emergency? Like the folks that go out there and check the properties, red tag them, et cetera? Do you have
Yes.
any backup support for that?
Well, yes, building division or jurisdictions have, I, for instance, have a certification that would allow me to actually be part of an emergency staff when there is an opportunity. I can also go to a neighboring jurisdiction. I can go to the Bay Area. I can go anywhere. And there is a method where municipalities also, through CalBO, can request for assistance, which is mutual assistance when there is an emergency. For instance, it happened and it was triggered during the last fires up in Sonoma and in Paradise. And it also applied when there was an earthquake situation back in Southern California and in Napa as well. Thank you. So yes, there is.
Okay, Sylvia.
Can you describe how you and the planning department collaborate? Because what you were talking about, setbacks and so on and so forth, that's partially planning issues too, and I would have thought that planning would have taken care of those things during the entitlements process, but you mentioned it, so I'm just curious how the two departments collaborate.
Correct, thank you. Planning, through their zoning regulations, they have for certain projects or certain structures, minimum setback distances, commercials, depending on where the district is. In the building department, we also have what we call setback distances for fire resistivity purposes, so that I can even put a house up to a zero property line, but you have to have it fully rated. And you have to have openings, or may not be able to have any openings.
Exactly.
So the more space you have in the setbacks, the more you're allowed to have openings.
I
The
see.
closer you get, and it differs for residential and the type of construction. Do you have resistive materials, or do you have just all combustion materials like wood, or like high rises? It's all steel and fully protected. You can go up to zero property line. but then your openings may be limited or not accepted.
And then just a quick follow-up comment. I'm really appreciative of the fact that an architect, well-trained, and everything in all matters of, everything you do is a very important part of the building department in Sacramento. So thank you for doing this. It's
Thank
a
you, my pleasure.
great role.
Yes, and who would have thought that I took this turn and be interested in the regulatory process,
Yeah.
which is design. So, yes, I did miss out on the design portion, but this is equally important to me.
Absolutely.
So, Roxanne, I have a very quick question. I'd like to continue the conversation after the meeting. I will have Laura reach out to you. My question is, any specific work that City of Sacramento's building department requires or accepts an interior designer's seal or signature?
Let me rephrase that. That would we require, what point do we allow or we would accept interior designers to design, to propose projects?
To, on your permit process, any permit, any structure, any work that you issue in permit, you will issue to a set of document that is signed and sealed by interior designer.
Okay, currently, my understanding is that certain projects require, when they're triggered, or when it's necessary to have a professional license from an architect or an engineer, we follow that same standard. So in cases where you're perhaps doing an interior remodel, where you are not, where you're removing and reconfiguring walls that are non-structural, for instance, we may accept the stamp by a designer or by an interior designer. Where it doesn't, personally, I would accept it if they follow, the design, the regulatory, tables of accessibility and this and that. I don't know if I made myself clear, but
good.
it depends on the scope of the work.
Do you mind to leave your contact information with the staff? We can reach out to you. Thank you again, Roxanne. Very informative. Oh, Sunny.
Okay,
Good, yeah, good.
one quick question.
Sure.
For the permits that are applied for that don't meet over-the-counter status, that need to go to a plan checker for oversight, what's the average length of time that it takes to make it to a plan checker's desk and then before you receive corrections in your department?
Good point. It depends on the valuation of the project.
So higher valuations are there paths?
Yeah, it differs. So some will take 15, 10 days. And some will take 7, 5, but it depends on the scope of the work and also the valuation. I'd be happy to share with you the link that we have that we can tell you just to get an idea.
And do you provide an expedited path?
Fee, yes, with a fee.
Great, thanks.
Of course. You're welcome. Anything else?
Thank you again.
Of course.
Okay, bye.
My pleasure. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next agenda item is we're going to honor a long time serving and distinguished our former member, for receiving Octavius Morgan Distinguished Service Award. And this year, the award goes to L. Kirk Miller. So do we have a presentation format somewhere?
No, just your
Okay.
comments for you.
Okay, and my comment, okay? So we have something for you too, Kirk, okay? So Mr. Miller has served the board in a variety of capacities for over 2 decades. He was appointed as an architect member of the board in September 1997 and continued until 2006 when his term expired. He served as a board secretary 2000 and 2006. Vice President 2001 and President 2002. Mr. Miller also chairs the board's post-licensure competence task force and served as a member of executive and examination committees. He continues to serve as a long-standing, dedicated member of a professional qualification committee where we met. So with that citation, we want award Kurt Miller this Octavia Morgan Distinguished Awards Service Award. Please move forward.
We can have a picture as well, so I'll step out.
Should we do this here? Maybe Kurt, why go all the way back?
Oh, I need to show you this. So you could tell me what to, how we can talk about this at any minute.
Very nice.
Should I move the chair?
Somebody posted this on NCAR.
Very nice.
Okay. Okay, great.
All right.
Congratulations. Yes, please. Kirk would like to say a few words.
That was. Did I put it in the chat? That's mine, sorry. Oh, we'll give him that one.
Mr. President, Madam Vice President, Madam Secretary, board members, executive officer, assistant executive officer, and ex-executive officer, late executive officer, Steve Sands, maybe sounds a little better to say executive officer emeritus. Thank you very much. This is very, very much appreciated. All of you are volunteers as well. Only we used to get $100 a day. I think maybe now get 200. So it's
50.
So I'd like to, first of all, reiterate your thanks to staff. Not only are they professional, they're hardworking, they're dedicated, they really hold this organization together. And it's a very, very strong corporate culture. It's very important. I still say that for California architects. And I'd like to congratulate all the board members who have been recognized for their service to the profession, for their civic engagement, for their community engagement, some political engagement, and to be recognized by the governor or the leaders of the legislature. Members of the public, two presenters, particularly AIA representatives who attend these meetings regularly, and good working relationship between the board and the profession. Just a couple of very, very quick questions. So we are all here and recognized, some of you consider it an award for service you've done, but how many of you see this as an opportunity, serving on the board? And I ask that because what is the state of the profession of architecture? And what is the body of knowledge of the profession of architecture? Professions have a body of knowledge that's generally agreed to. If you look at the law profession, there's a body of evidence and a body of knowledge that's basically agreed to. But is there an agreed to body of knowledge for the practice of architecture? So that's a question. And having said that, then what changes are facing this profession? The health and safety is one thing. You have that under control. You have all kinds of committees doing that and so forth. But what about the welfare? That's a little more ambiguous. And the question I have, is there a change necessary now because of the increased urbanization of our society? One of the things we learned in architecture school and in practice is always study the site. You've got to make your building specific to the site. But now, what is the context in which those buildings are? And are we, as a profession, trained and educated to take into effect the context where the building sits? And what are the welfare ramifications for that building sitting into an existing context? So with those questions, I applaud what you're doing. Continue the great work. It's a fantastic board, recognized nationally. I'm glad to see that NCARB has improved since when I was on the board. We used to be kind of loggerheads at 10 cars. Now they really seem to pick up their game, and I really see some really positive changes they're making with internship and with professional exams and things of that nature. So please keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your remark. So before we move to the next item, I just want to clarify that for the public members here, if you want to be recognized by our meeting minutes, you can sign in your name. And then when you have questions for the board, I want that board member know that if the item raised is not in our agenda, we can defer these items for future meetings or in our strategic sessions. So we do not take action and discussions on items not agenda. So with that said, any public member have remarks at this moment? Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Mark Christian with the American Institute of Architects, California. Just provide some information that comes from the last discussion to Board Member Gladstone on architects and accessory dwelling units, the profession. There are architects who specialize in that. But most importantly, I would like for you and the board to know that AI California has a website that is a public-facing website, not for architects, but for members of the public who are interested in ADUs. If you want to look at it, it's +1house.org, +1house.org. It's intended to educate the public if they're considering ADUs, a good source of information. And to Board Member Campos on the assistance to building officials when there is an emergency. California Office of Emergency Services has an SAP program. I believe that stands for Structural Assessment Program. I believe your architect consultant, Mr. Chase, is a SAP. SAP. Yes, we question the SAP, but he's a SAP. Architects, engineers, building officials will go through California Cal OES training and be certified. So when there is a declared emergency, these volunteers are called up and they will go to where the assistance is needed. It's not just limited to California. Cal OES certification is the premier certification in the nation. Other states recognize it. So California architects went to New Orleans. California architects go to other parts of the country, as do structural engineers and building officials, when there's a national disaster that has affected the built environment and they need very, very quick assessment. Red tag, or it's safe to go in. Just very, very fast, 15-minute, look. So that program does exist. Architects, good for this board to know.
Right.
Architects are part of that program. It's a voluntary thing.
Can you
Good.
repeat the
Thank you,
two?
Mark.
Mark?
I have the
Mark.
website.
Okay, all right. She's got the website. Okay, fine. Thank you.
So just take this opportunity to encourage the fellow architect members to sign up. If you take a one-day training, you are qualified likely to be the inspector. It's a tremendous help to the society. I encourage all my licensed staff and myself to do that. So, thank you, Mark, for mentioning that. And California is always in the forefront of public health and safety. The next item, I'd like to see anyone want to move forward with adopt the last meeting minute, which is September 11th, 1929.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, I hear move and a second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Denise Campos.
Aye.
Taeyeon Fang.
Aye.
Brett Gladstone.
Aye.
Pascual Gutierrez.
Yes.
Sylvia Kwan.
Yes.
Ebony Lewis.
Yes.
Robert Perman.
Aye.
Nilsa Serrano, aye. Sunny Ward.
Yes.
Do budget, how about?
He's not here yet.
Okay, I do yours first. No, I do yours. You want to do that? Yeah. So, good. So the motion passed. We adopt the meeting minutes. The next item is we will have our own director, executive director, to discuss the possible action and revised executive office duty statement, which is a minor extension of her work. Laura, go ahead.
Sure, this is item K. And we'll take up the budget item later. Our budget analyst is not yet available. He's at a different board meeting right now. So the revised duty statement, this is, the only change to the duty statement is to reflect the fact that the board will start fingerprinting candidates for licensure. So the staff that would review those records that come in need to be background checked themselves. And so as the board's approved my duty statement, we need to add this change to require the executive officer to undergo a background check before the board implements the program. So additional staff will be, have the same language added to their duty statement.
We do need to take action. Yeah, Tara.
I have a request for minor technical corrections. It's just,
Do you have the paper?
so this is page 3 of the duty statement.
She's got a mic.
Line 3, it says, parent, employee, and friend. I just take the friend out.
Okay.
Can we have a motion with the correction?
I
Someone
move.
can make motion?
Second.
I can. So,
Move, second.
okay. So Sylvia had made the motion and Nilsa seconded. Secretary, please call the roll.
Denise Campos,
Oh, sorry. Oh, that's right. Any public comments? I hear none, so we move
okay,
forward with
thank
roll
you.
call.
A roll call, Denise Campos.
Aye.
Tiang Fang.
Aye.
Brett Gladstone.
Aye.
Pascual.
Yes.
Sylvia.
Aye.
Ebony.
Aye.
Robert. Nilsa. Aye. Sunny.
Yes.
Okay, motion passed. The executive duty statements revised as corrected. The next item, we move forward with staff's report. Okay, so this is discuss and possible action on proposed adoption of California Code of Regulations, type,
What about item H?
Do you want to go back to closed session or do you want to go?
which session?
So we haven't done.
I thought you would want to wait for, is he coming? Do you know how soon he's coming?
For budget, he's coming, but you can do closed session.
Okay, then I want to do closed session. Sorry, I rearranged the agenda a little bit. As we're waiting for our budget report, I'd like to start our closed session, and we'll reopen after closed session is complete, so the public and may accept it. Budget update. The staff from DCA is Paul McDermott. Good enough? Okay, thank you, Paul. Are you going to just talk about the DCA? Or us?
Correct.
Or both?
Just architect.
Good, our board. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul McDermott. I am the budget analyst from the Department of Consumer Affairs, and I've had the privilege of the last 2 years to be the budget analyst for the Board of Architects.
Okay.
What I wanted to do before I dig into the numbers, I just want to give a quick synopsis of how the budget process starts. It ends and starts with the fiscal year. So we start our process for the current budget at the end of last fiscal year. So we don't start from scratch, we build from what we had. And over that period, we go through budget building. And we do that in the fall typically, and we just went through a very arduous department-wide budget building because there were a lot of changes, a lot of moving parts, a lot of increased costs due to cost of doing business in California. So we do that through the fall, and we go through processes like budget change proposals, budget letters, spring finance letter will be coming up, May revise, everything that we need, every tool we have to help reallocate funds or augment budgets either negatively or positively. So we went through that in the fall, and that culminates with the Jan 10 release of the governor's budget. And at that point, we have the current budget ready to go, and we build from there. So it's a process of looking at several different things. It could be employee compensation, it could be retirement rates, it could be anything that involves or has a direct impact, a significant impact to each board and bureau. So with that said, two things we look at when we look at budgets like any business. We look at revenues and expenditures, what's coming in, what's going out. And as long as we say, hey, the revenues are low or high, excuse me, and the expenditures are low, everything's great. So two documents that I use, and I submit this to the board every month. I use the expenditure, a projected expenditure receipt, or document, and then I also use what's called a fund condition. The fund condition, I'll start real quick. The fund condition tells you what you are bringing in, your streams of revenue. It's good, most of it's going to be from renewal fees. There'll be some initial fees, some licensing fees, but most of the dollars will come from those type of fees. And then down below, you'll see a line item that says 111 department, that's going to be your expenditures. So this document here has, as you go top to bottom, has your revenues, your expenditures, and what we project to have left over at the end. What's critical there is if you look at the bottom, it'll say 13, for this year, it's 13.3 months. Why that's critical is let's just say everything falls apart and funding, something happens to the funding or the revenue streams. We have 13.3 months in reserves to function as a board.
Right.
We recommend a healthy board being anywhere from 3 to 6, so we're pretty good strength here. We've had boards in the past that have reached the statutory limit of 24, and we've had to rein in some, or spend more, I should say. So right now, on the fund condition, everything I can say is looking strong. You'll see a trend going negative, that's fine. We're still in a very positive manner. And every year we have a reversion that affects the next year's budget. So that changes every year when we start building the budget. On the expenditure side, which is this document here, your middle column, your yellow column is going to be your governor's budget allocation. And like I said, we build this through the year. We just released it on Jan 10. This is augmented, and then the blue column is going to be the current year expenditures. As you go from left to right, you can see a column where I say year-end projection. Our job is to help the board understand where they're going to be at the end of the year. And we do this every month. We don't want too many surprises all of a sudden on the 12th or 13th month saying, oh, by the way, you've blown your budget. So we do this on a regular basis, and we go through the budget process. And if you can see pretty quickly, we've got a healthy surplus, projected surplus, I guess you could call it, of $413,000, or about 10% of your overall budget. 6 to 10% is another healthy number when it comes to your expenditure, your reversion, or your savings for the year. So if you look at the fund condition, we say 3 to 6 is healthy. We've exceeded that. If you look at the expenditure document, we say 3 to 6 months, or I'm sorry, 6 to 10% is a healthy number to look at. So if you look at your expenditures and you look at your revenue, your fund condition statement, both are healthy. So I can sit in front of you and say that the board is fiscally responsible with the money they've been charged to run the operations. And I don't foresee any issues going forward for this fiscal year, and I don't see any going next year. So I can sit in front of you and say that the funds look good and the spending looks good.
Okay. So I was in conversation with Laura and just want to continue with you. So you do a monthly coordinations or look up our sheets and make sure it's okay. If you see some signals, are you normally just contact Laura or we have to contact you? What is the working relationship?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, if you look up the top of the document,
Yeah.
the bottom line says FM06, so that's fiscal month 6. So
Yeah.
she gets, let me step back a little bit. We're getting more accurate and timely reports now through our fiscal system.
Uh-huh.
And that is a drastic change from what we had last year. So we're getting current reports to her. So I reach out, I send the reports to Laura and to Vicki Mayer as well. And so if I see anything, I call and say, hey, what's going on with this line item? Case in point, we had a scenario where there was another expenditure where another board entered a contract that I didn't know about. And so all of a sudden I see an encumbrance of $100,000 and I didn't see it yet. It didn't hit my fiscal reporting, but on my encumbrance side, but it hit the spending side. So I had to find out what that was. So I'll reach out and say, what is the situation with this one line item?
Okay.
So there's communication back and forth.
Good. So we are going to invest something on that ADA compliance of our document. So I assume you and Laura will work out. Is there anything flagging that you want to talk about while we're here, or we just give it to you and Laura? to tackle that issue.
I will say, I think the money that will go to the contract that the director spoke to earlier, it's approximately $100,000 for the board. I don't think that reflects in the information in the packet, but it is something that the budget office, Paul, is aware of. He's very on top of things, and he's going to find something before I will.
Okay. Yeah, Ebony and Denise.
Okay. Hi, thank you for sharing this with us. It looks like our operating expenses, we don't really hit them that much. We're probably doing really well. But for example, with training, if we're not utilizing all the funds, would they cut those funds over time?
No, what happens is you go through the allocation, in the same case, let's say we overspend in state travel. If we overspend, are we gonna move funds over there? No, we don't cut the funds, and it's just an allocation of it. We're looking to see where the funds are spent. We've been talking to the budget's office, we wanna go through a line item reallocation to get it more accurate. No, they won't take away the funds. We will make sure that you're not spending beyond your allocation. But because you don't spend it, it's not taken away. It's not a scenario of spend or lose.
Denise.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm glad to hear that we're in a healthy budget state for the board. I wanted to know if departments are ever audited, and if so, what would trigger that?
Oh. Never been asked that. I'd have to defer to find out more information on how that happens. I can't say that they aren't audited. I'm not part of that. That's a whole new other scenario, so I'd have to get back to you on that.
Thank you. Email would be great if Laura can just share it with us.
Okay. Yeah, Robert.
Two questions. One, if we wanted to spend money, say, to help support a summer high school training camp about teaching about architecture, et cetera, is that something that the board can do on its own, or do you have to approve some type of external expenditure like that in some way?
No, I don't approve the external expenditures. I report how it's spent, so that decision would be made by the board or Laura, if you want to.
Yeah, I think if we wanted to start spending in a new category, we'd have to submit a budget change proposal and submit a request to get it approved and include it as part of our budget. It's sort of, it's a lengthy process.
And then the second question was, we switched to a, collection agency to collect some of our unpaid fees and fines. Did the budget anticipate increased revenue from that, or it's still just left open because it's a new thing?
Are we talking Cedars is the collection agency? The amount that I see coming from that is not significant right now. It's a small amount when the line item of expenditure, so I suspect the goal with that, because it was entered into the contract, the goal of that is to maximize and spend to that contract amount. And I don't remember exactly what it is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Paul.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Agenda L, discuss and possible actions of a proposed adoption of California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Division 2, Article 5, Section 135.
What happened to K? Are we not doing K?
We did K.
We did it
We
already?
did a K.
Okay,
We did okay.
thank you.
Where are we now?
So we have our own staff, Mike Skanga. Skanga?
Yes, thank you.
I made it. Okay. Go ahead. Are you going to present there? Or? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Mike.
What are we on?
Oh, yeah.
L.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Mike Skanga. I am the lead analyst in the enforcement unit. The board's strategic plan and the concerns of licensees led to efforts to restrict advertisements of unlicensed individuals offering architectural services or identifying themselves as architects or architectural firms. The issue was determined to be especially prevalent on company websites, social media platforms like LinkedIn, Yelp, Facebook, Houzz, and Manta, and job sites like Craigslist. And the board's Regulatory and Enforcement Committee met last August and looked at several solutions, including one, citing and fining people who are miscategorized on those sites. Two, sending a demand letter to companies who run the sites. And three, asking architects to identify themselves in advertising by license number to distinguish themselves from unlicensed designers. In that respect, our team continues to enforce Business and Professions Code Section 5536 of the Architects Practice Act against individuals who actively post misleading advertising, but they are often not in control of what category the website automatically uses to classify them. And we have also sent letters to the platform companies with little effect because we do not have the jurisdiction to demand that they change their categorization procedures. So finally, we discussed the benefits of asking architects to use their license numbers in advertising at the September 2019 board meeting. And our team was asked to develop proposed regulatory language and solicit input from licensees. For regulatory language, we started with the enabling law, Business and Professions Code Section 137, which allows any agency within DCA to promulgate regulations requiring licensees to include their license numbers in advertising, soliciting, or other presentments to the public. We also examined similar laws and regulations in effect at the Department of Insurance, Board of Behavioral Science, Contractor State License Board, Department of Real Estate, Board of Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists, and the regulation this board approved for the Landscape Architects Technical Committee. The resulting proposed regulatory language is attached to Agenda Item L as CCR Title 16, Section 135. And we also sent a survey to all licensees by email and collected responses for 2 weeks last November. We received input from more than 1,500 architects, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. 66% reacted positively or very positively to the regulation. Of those who objected, we asked what their major concerns were and tried to incorporate those concerns in the proposed language, specifically as how it would apply to large firms. With regard to how it would be enforced in general, I'd like to emphasize that this proposal is designed to identify unlicensed practice and advertising, not to punish licensed architects who fail to comply. The board is asked to review and discuss the proposed regulation and delegate authority to the executive officer to adopt the regulation, subject to public comment.
Okay. Yeah.
Just
Robert?
a comment maybe to Laura. I wonder if this is something that should be discussed with DCA in general, because the issue that we couldn't influence the websites, I mean, the contracts would have the same thing, I suppose, and any other licensed professions, whether to tackle that requires some statewide legislation that will allow the state in general to attack that problem, that we couldn't do it individually. So that's something that has been discussed with DCA overall, should be.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know for me, the contractors board, it was a real issue there as well, and they had, the same problem getting the websites to make the change. I don't know that anyone has discussed it with DCA, so that could be something we follow up with them to see if that's something, if other boards are experiencing it, if they look at a broader solution. It's a good suggestion.
I just want to follow up on that comment. Is that
Yeah, Sylvia and Nyota.
Okay, sorry, I just want to follow up on that. As you were bringing that issue up and as you were posing the question, I was thinking along the lines of trying to control anything in the social media realm is really difficult, because even the blatantly false content that's acknowledged with, political interference and so on and so forth has not successfully gotten these social media platforms to change or to regulate. So we're so far down the totem pole and a list of priorities that I just don't, I think we're just, barking up the wrong tree, kind of wrong analogy, but that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, Nyota.
As a consumer advocate, I think it's a great idea. Doctors, attorneys, other professions have to do that. I don't think it's, as a consumer, I think it'd be a great added value to ensuring that you're hiring somebody that's completely licensed.
Albany and Sunny.
Also, architect, the term itself has become super trendy, so people are just using it for everything. And I don't know that people know that it's a protected term or profession. So I think we need to do just education for the public in general so that they understand that it is a protected profession.
Sunny?
Do we have a list of professionals that are required to list their license number on their advertising?
Laura can speak to it. We have a few I know of, and our own LATC is requiring that.
I actually don't have a list off the top of my head. I know contractors does. Mike, do you have the information?
I read the list from Department of Consumer Affairs and California agencies. The list that I referred to, that we looked at when we were devising the language, included the Department of Insurance, Department of the Board of Behavioral Science, Contractor State License Board, Department of Real Estate, Board of Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors and Geologists, and landscape architects.
And I think real estate brokers also.
And I think a lot of the health boards, if they don't have a requirement like this, they have a requirement that the license be posted where the consumer goes to see them, so they have that information.
Correct.
Denise?
I can see the benefit for consumers to being able to see that an architect is licensed. I also think it's kind of an aspirational policy because I don't see that we're going to be able to really regulate this. And my question is, if we do go after someone who is advertising, if this passes and we go after someone who's advertising without printing their license number, what would be the ramifications for the person?
I can only speculate at this point that it would be a graduated response. We would certainly want to make sure that everybody knew about the regulation to begin with. Then they'd probably send them a letter telling them that some of their advertising was not compliant. I don't see this as a means to generate revenue from architects. It's mostly just to get them to help us regulate against unlicensed people.
You want to say something?
Pascual and then me.
I think
Pascual
Tara has something too.
and Pascual.
Pascal and Neota.
Ladies first.
Neota and Pascal.
What I wanted to say is that, yes, we may not get a lot of resolution from the social media platform locations. However, there's got to be a start. And if a lot of us start doing the same thing, then eventually I think legislation will have to follow. But I think that it has to start somewhere, and this is a good opportunity for us to save and provide a source for the consumer.
Go ahead, Pascal.
Okay, so the board does exist to protect the consumer, and the consumer does have the ability and opportunity to view whether someone is licensed and whether their license is valid or without disciplinary action on the CAB website. So I think the consumer has an opportunity there. The advertising, this may work for one or two firms, but I have great concern about the larger firms, particularly because the advertisement in names, cards, office sign, and letterhead. I can't imagine how practical that is for an architect of 500 staff to have one or two architects listed on the building and then have it on their stationery. And then it's a kind of a revolving door when those architects leave and another architect replaces them because they're delegated to be the architects of record for that firm. You're talking about wholesale stationery reproduction. I think that's impractical. I wholly support that the license should be on solicitations for prospective clients as well as contract proposals. I think that's what, without saying, that's where the license should be.
Business card.
Yeah.
So we responded to that by adding this 135B.
Right.
That would identify a single person within any firm
Yep.
whose license number could be used.
I understand that, and if I have a business card and I'm a licensed architect for that firm and I hand a card to a client and there's another architect with a different license number on there, how confusing can that be to a consumer?
No, I think
So-
on your card, you would have your license number. It's just when you have general advertisements in a magazine. or
No,
something.
not working. But ladies first, I want to say something, but I'm not lady. So, Nilza and Silva.
first, I was
Silva and Nilza.
I raised my hand first. I had the exact same concern that Pascal's talking about. However, in the 135, Article 5, I found the answer. So Pascal, if you look at I guess it's called subsection 135 or whatever, it says, in all forms of advertisement solicitation, that's not a business card, okay? Other presentations to the public in connection with the rendering of architectural services, okay, for which a license is required. So when I read that, I was satisfied, because that does not mean your stationery, it does not mean your business card. To me, it means these two items, that it's a public presentation and a advertisement. So it does, am I right, Mike, that you try to limit this requirement to public? I mean, I should say, public presentations and advertising. Am I correct in reading that, or is it as extreme as Pascal thinks?
Well, 135A includes cards,
Oh, it does.
office signs, letterhead.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
In which
Oops,
case,
I missed that.
like I'm saying, I think that you would have your individual number on your card.
Yeah, I think that's
So,
enough.
Nilza, you go ahead and then save a few minutes.
Thank you.
Yield to me.
Thank you. I wanted to say that we have law firms that have 2,000 or 3,000 attorneys that work for them, and they're able to manage it because it's the law that they have to have their license on their letterhead. I think now people are not printing letterhead in hundreds and hundreds of copies anymore. I think people just print as they go from their regular computer. It's not like it used to be where you have to have it. It just automatically prints. So you could have your license without a problem.
Okay, so Brett wants to say something.
Yeah, as a person who's been a partner for a long time in a very, very large San Francisco firm, I can tell you, we don't put our state bar numbers on our letterhead or stationery or anything, and are not required to,
See?
or on our business cards.
Not on your signature either.
Not on our signature.
No, see?
So,
Yeah, just
okay,
to-
Robert.
Just to be clear again, while it does refer to advertisement card and letterhead, it's all in the context of advertisement solicitation to the
Exactly.
public. So if they're already your client, or it's a
Exactly.
one-on-one thing, you don't have to worry about it. It's kind of
Exactly.
I think the intent would be read by anybody if it got into, certainly our regulations, is it's the broad advertising solicitation for work to the public, would mean the
Exactly.
firm's brochure as opposed to your own individual card. So I think
I agree.
that's what we meant, and I think if we all bring that meaning to the table as we regulate, we won't go overboard.
Yeah.
No, Tara.
Can I say something? No, Tara. No, your lady. Go, Tara.
So I did want to just point out that LATC has had,
A little louder, please.
Wireless. Wireless. Fancy.
I just wanted to point out that LATC has had its own regulation, which, was already brought up. That's 16 CCR 2671. That's been operative since at least 2002. They do not list office signs, telephone listings, websites. Does anyone know if that's being added? Because I know that that's currently being revised. That regulation's being revised to add the number requirement. Well, my point is just that LATC's been doing this for a while. They have limited it to, well, it says including but not limited to, so their list is much smaller. Advertisement, card, letterhead, or contract proposal. And that seems to be working pretty well. So it may be possible to strike office sign, or, if there were some other concerning locations for this information, you could whittle the list down if that was your preference.
So, can I say something? Yeah, 3 point I like to make. Mark, you want to say something first? I actually like to you speak first. I try to lead a discussion to some decision making. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, Mark Christian with AIA California. First, AIA California does not have a position on this yet. We are still reviewing it. With that said, if I could share with you some of the thoughts, some of the concerns that have been raised, and maybe we are misunderstanding. If that's the case, please, correct me, let me know. But for example, on advertisements, that you'd have to have a licensee name and number on there. Let's say it's a national firm advertising with a national publication, architectural record in New York, and the Chicago office is doing it. Would the California office be in violation because this national firm in a national publication out of New York did not include a California architect's name or a California architect's number on it? Would that be an issue? Would an architect whose child goes to a high school and the high school is looking for advertisements in the local football program, and so, okay, here's the $250. I never bought such an ad. I don't know what it costs. Would that be a violation of this proposed regulation, and therefore subjecting an architect to some type of administrative penalty? I trust the staff today that they're not going to do that. A staff 10 years from now who I don't know, I cannot put that trust in them. Are we going to be creating a technical violation that could impact an architect? We understand that contractors have this requirement, and we would, one of the thoughts is that contractors and architects in many ways are different. I think the amount of fraud by non-licensed contractors on the public is far greater than architects. And also, I think the average client of an architect is a sophisticated individual. The average client of an architect is not hiring an architect for the first time. They're in the development business. They're a hospital. They're a school district. They're a retail establishment. They're a chain. They may be hiring an architect for the first time to design a residence, but that's not a first-time home buyer. These are generally very sophisticated people. It's a bit different than someone who may be hiring a contractor to fix a fence or to trim branches off a tree. So we're just concerned. We completely support the objective to protect the consumers, to go after those who are not licensed. And one thing, again, it's not a position, but just throwing it out there, something we're looking at. If architects in California are required to fill out a business entity reporting form, whatever it's called, I forget, every architect is supposed to fill out a form that identifies the business through which that architect is providing an architectural service. So there's a database at CAB that lists all of the businesses offering architectural services. If a firm that's in an advertisement is in that database, should that be deemed compliance with this requirement if the board decides to proceed with this? So if I'm not an architect, I'm a political dweeb, or legally an architect of legislative strategy, if I wanted to use that term. I cannot use that term. My employer wouldn't allow me, but I love it. If I were an architect, and so Mark Christian with River City Architects, and I filled out the form, so CAB has River City Architects in its database, and I do an advertisement, and I don't mention my license number, I would be in compliance because you already know that River City Architects exist, and I'm the licensed architect associated with it. That data already exists, assuming all architects are filling out the forms, which I'm sure they are. So again, we have no official position. Those are the thoughts that we have. I just wanted to share them with you for your consideration. And if I got any of if our understanding is incorrect, please, I welcome it.
So,
Sorry, girls first.
okay, Nyocha,
Thank you.
yield some time to me, please.
I will yield 30 seconds to you. What I wanted to say is I appreciate your comments. However, you talked about big organizations that have the infrastructure to do that. We are tasked to protect the public, the average person that is going to hire an architect, not a hospital. We're not talking about who's going to build a prison or who's going to build a big infrastructure. And that's what you mentioned. And they have the staff and the infrastructure to do some digging. We, unfortunately, as a consumer, do not. So I think that we need to really continue to move forward to protect the consumer. So that's my position. Thank you.
Okay, so I was trying to make 3 points, and my point 1 and 2 is largely covered by Mark's remark. So when we protect the consumers, we also think we are facilitator of a licensure and enforcement process as well on the other end. So we are agency who make this connection and provide a safer environment for all. So the implementation of this is very challenging, and I don't want to list all the challenge part, and to some extent, maybe not even feasible to advertise to including your license. If you propose a disciplinary service to a large agency like us, and it will be impossible. It is completely impossible to have them to list a license. They either list many hundred or many thousand, or list one, and which is not the case because that one architect may not be actually ongoing supported project. So think the practical reality, the other side, the profession side, how can we respond to the requirement? But also think to how to protect our customers, our consumers. That's my second point. Is so we have LATC already practiced that, so we can start looking into the effectiveness of it and take some data and analyze, see if to what degree it adds to the protection of our consumers. Okay. By having a license advertised on their business card, in other words. So the third one is, for all the conversation I heard, looks like we need to take action, but the action is not ready in terms of moving forward or not. I think our action, my recommendation is defer this item to our communication committee or both communication committee and enforcement committee, and to have a more conversation studies and come back and we'll continue the conversation next or in future meetings.
I'll make that motion. Are you making a motion?
Okay, could you make, yeah.
I think we need a motion for that.
Okay.
But could I ask for a clarification? So I think the Regulatory Enforcement Committee already took up this item. I don't recall what their action was, if they took a vote on it, or did we just send it forward?
They recommended that
They
we
did,
come up with
yeah. So
language.
the committee's already reviewed it and discussed it. You could certainly send it back and tell them you have more comments you want
yeah.
them to review.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want it to go to both committees. Is that what you're asking for, or just one or the other?
I let the member decide. I think it probably benefit from a communication committee as well.
Is there a mechanism for asking for the data, for why this is necessary?
You can ask staff.
If I can provide some background, I think the reason why we have this item is because we were concerned about false advertisement of architectural services, whether it was on social media, internet, newspapers. So we wanted to find a way to address so that the consumer would know whether someone was a licensed architect or not.
If I can, that was in the absence of knowing that on the CAB website, there's a tab that says license verification. Okay.
But I think it's also in part because most consumers don't know to go to CAB's website. So it's one more way to get consumers to think about the fact that, oh, a license is required, and I could go look it up and see if there's information I need to be aware of.
Yeah, it's no different than the contractors. You can always look it up, but the law says you got to put it on your contract. So presumably because they deemed it to be additional information to consumers who frankly don't do everything they probably should do to protect themselves. That's the real world. So we have to try and help fill the void. But as the head of rec, I don't mind kicking it back to us. And do you have a sense, Mark, of when you might give any sort of formal opinion or feedback, at least beyond what you stated?
Any position has to be adopted by our Board of Directors. Our Board of Directors is meeting on March 13th, and we will see if we can get this on the agenda for discussion. We had an informal discussion about it in the fall of 2019, and I assume we're going to want to discuss it again on March 13th.
My sense is rec wasn't, we weren't burning to have it done right away, so.
Is your microphone on?
Oh, if we want to, you know, as a chairman of the rec, I have no objection to kicking it to a summer rec meeting and have more input received by then. Staff could collect it too, and then we can bring it back to the full board later on this year.
So I think Sunny was formulating a motion. You want to go ahead?
We don't need a motion.
We don't need a motion?
Yeah. We'll just send it back to committee.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, we don't need a motion.
I would just request that you be really clear about the data you want these committees to compile so that they can, get actual legitimate data back to you so that you can make your decision. So, if you could just spend a little bit of time, I know that you mentioned LATC's regulation, maybe take a look at that and see, I think you were saying the effectiveness of that regulation?
Yeah. How this result in the increase of consumer protection in any tangible way.
Mhm. So perhaps that's through, have you issued any citations based upon that code section, or letters of education, or found any other violations of that LATC regulation, and how many? And did that resolve the problem?
Can we defer to the actual scope to the staff executive director?
Yes.
Okay. Now LATC wants to speak. Okay, Andy.
Well, I believe as this kind of started with the LATC, just a quick comment. It was never the intent that, the LATC never had the intent of requiring that license numbers be forced on a 65-story building in downtown Los Angeles. So that wasn't the intent. The intent was to serve as kind of a deterrent for those who might want to hold themselves out as a landscape architect, or in this case, an architect, to make them think twice about advertising their services when they're not licensed. Because if the consumer starts to realize that real architects, real landscape architects, will have a license number associated with their name or their company or whatever it happens to be, that might get them to think twice about advertising themselves or holding themselves out as an architect when they're not.
So that looks like along that trace, you can get some data of it, how this is discouraged otherwise. Yeah, Sunny?
I want to respond to that and then ask for some other information. I think that there's a difference between the landscape architecture licensing and architecture in that the architecture board has a longer history and an existence, and the issues are, I would imagine, are different than landscape architects, as the board is newer and the issues are a little bit newer. That might be a bad assumption, but I'm assuming that the differentiation between a landscape designer and an architect, for instance, is a really big deal. There's no such thing as an architectural designer, for instance. That would not be a possible way to advertise yourself. So I'd like to just point out that difference in the issues in the two fields. Also, into the kind of data that I would be looking for, it seems like the conversation started looking towards new media and advertising, and the relative ease in which it seems to be possible to falsely advertise yourself as an architect in this sort of new media digital age. And for me to make a sort of advised determination on this personally, I would need to see complaints social media, new media from 15 or 20 years ago versus new media world complaints to see that this has been, that this is a growing problem and it's getting worse, and that it's actually needs and deserves our focus right now. So that's the kind of information that I'd like to see.
Okay, and, yeah, Andy, so,
Thank you. I just want to, in response to your comment, though, the state of California had the State Board of Landscape Architects, which was established in 1953, and the board was sunset in the 1990s. So this isn't anything new. Coming back to that comment. So, and then landscape architects were identified as a profession in 1899. So we've been around a long time.
That wasn't the intent of my comment.
Yeah.
The comment was to differentiate that there's a very specific need and desire for people to properly advertise themselves, whether they're a landscape architect or not.
I think,
and it's much easier in your profession because of the profession, for people to call themselves a landscape designer and hold themselves out. And because it was sunsetted, there weren't laws in place to protect you and protect your profession.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that's an accurate statement, but we'll let it go. Because keep in mind, California did have building designers up until a few years back,
but the essence, the message from Sunny, at least I get it, and his message is independent of how long the landscape licensing board exists. So we're okay on that. So Nyoza, that's your last chance.
No, it's not. I just like to remind the board that we are here, and our mandate is to protect the consumer. And I know that this may be a little bit cumbersome for the architects, and I understand that. However, we have to start somewhere, and this might be the place that we start to ensure that legislation follows and starts protecting consumer from social media and some of the wrong that it's done. That's my comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that if you listen to the recording, we really cover nearly, the chief spectrum of the concerns, and the committee will benefit from discussion, and I trust we'll present something that for another discussion. So thank you for all your good comments on this item. We are going to move to item number M, which is review and possible action on modified proposed regulatory language CC&R Section 110, substantial relationship criteria and criteria for rehabilitation. So Tara, why don't you take that?
Okay, I think the agenda item memo does a really good job of tracking the background on this, which was that you, Architects Board, reviewed and approved this proposal a year ago at the same time as the LATC's proposal to respond to and implement the requirements of AB 2138, to tweak your regulations on substantially related and rehabilitation criteria. The reason this is back before you is because another board, my other client, Veterinary Medical Board, submitted their proposal, which is nearly identical to Architects Board and LATC's proposals. The vet med package was withdrawn because OAL raised some substantive concerns with the language because the proposals are in effect the same. I am now proposing modified revisions to the original proposed regulatory language for your review and adoption. I worked closely with OAL to resolve their concerns with the vet med package. This language before you looks very similar to vet meds. So I believe that this language would be approved. However, I can't guarantee anything because apparently there are different reviewers at OAL. So if we get a different attorney for your packages, they might find other concerns. So I'm just saying that right now, I think you need to modify this text in these ways, which I'll go over quickly, to at least address the concerns we know about. All right, so for CCR Section 110, substantial relationship criteria, part of what AB 2138 did was revised the board's ability, all of the board's abilities, to deny an application on the basis of a criminal conviction or an administrative disciplinary action in another jurisdiction on the basis of professional misconduct. So what the revision here will do is clarify. So we've already added professional misconduct. That's going to mirror AB 2138, the denial piece of it. We're also going to add or Section 5586, which is your Practice Act ability to discipline a licensee to suspend or revoke on the basis of disciplinary action in another jurisdiction on the basis of professional misconduct. So that's a clarifying change in my mind. We're just calling out that Section 5586 is a section that requires a substantial relationship criteria to be reviewed by the board for purposes of license denial, suspension, or revocation. So that's primarily clarifying. There are a couple other minor technical revisions to this section. The big piece is under 110.1. So this is on pages 2 and 3. For both denial of a license and suspension or revocation, we're clarifying the two steps. The first step is applying rehabilitation criteria to an applicant or a licensee who has a criminal conviction, but they have successfully completed probation. So we're going to go ahead and use this list of items to look at to determine their rehabilitation, which is going to be different than the second list of criteria. So what I'm looking at is the difference between, on page 2, 110.1, subsection A, paragraph 1 versus paragraph 2. Paragraph 1, in this instance, is for denial for criminal conviction with successful completion of probation. Paragraph 2 is aimed at everyone else. So that's an individual who has a criminal conviction and they haven't yet completed their probation, or they didn't do it successfully, or there is an administrative disciplinary action in another jurisdiction on the basis of professional misconduct, or the denial is based on one or more grounds under 5552, 5553, and I believe both of those are both substantial relationship. Oh, I'm sorry. Those are both professional misconduct provisions there that we're just like clearly specifying. The reason we're making this change is arguably what we had before. If you'll see the paragraph that's attached to that, it's all in strike through. This pretty much said the same thing. It just wasn't clear enough. It didn't describe the individuals clearly enough for OAL. So we're laying it out. You didn't finish your criminal probation successfully for whatever reason. You have professional misconduct, disciplinary action in another jurisdiction. That's when these terms would be used. So then on page 3.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Yep.
In the, what I guess is A2, the third line refers to subsection C1. What is the C1 reference?
Where's C1?
Should that be changed to another subsection?
In LATCs, it says A1.
Maybe it's B?
Yeah, let's change that to A. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, so did everybody get that? We're on page 2, subsection A, paragraph 2, line 3. We're changing subsection C1 to subsection A1.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions on this provision?
I was reading it, could not figure out the significant difference, but most architects are dyslexics, so, sorry. So then I was thinking, well, I have 2 lawyers, and maybe, no, seriously, so are they okay, look good? Okay.
Well, the way and tell me, Tara, if I'm reading it correctly, but when I read it, I felt that it was making a more definitive stance, or a definitive definition, I should say, of someone who has gone through these 2 criteria, right? Rehabilitation, and what was the second thing again? Oh, right, and completing the sentence without a violation. So in other words, they have become a clean, honorable citizen, therefore, so I just see it as more definitive maybe than before. I don't know.
Oh, good. Well, maybe I'm explaining it better.
Yes, you are. That's the way I read it.
Okay, so more discussions, or we rely on 2 lawyers here?
All right, well, I'm not done. There's more.
More?
So on page 3, we're making the same changes to that paragraph 2, and to clarify the individuals who the second set of rehabilitation criteria will apply to, and those are the individuals who didn't do successful completion of their criminal probation, have the professional misconduct, disciplinary action in another jurisdiction. And one thing I do want to point out here is that for licensees, which is what the paragraph, the provisions on page 3 apply to, for licensees, we're also calling out if you have a violation under Article 5, which is all of your disciplinary statutes, if you have a violation of those provisions, then we will look at your rehabilitation criteria in accordance with this list. So basically, we're saying that every single person, every licensee who has a violation of the Practice Act or 141, that's the professional misconduct in another jurisdiction, we see you violated the law, but we're going to look at what you've done to show us that you're not going to do that again. So we're going to apply, basically, with these provisions, we're going to apply rehabilitation criteria to everyone. So it's not just applicants with a crime. It's not just a licensee with a crime or professional misconduct. It's everybody who is being denied for criminal conviction, professional misconduct, and it's every licensee who's violated the Practice Act. In this way, we're moving toward equity, equal application of the rehab criteria, which benefits the individual, so that we can really take a look at and see, okay, well, it's not just that they have a DUI and somehow that's substantially related because, that's a different regulation. It's also that they have done all of this stuff to address their misconduct. They want to keep their license. They are proving to us all of the steps they've taken to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So, that's part of the reasoning behind making these provisions more robust and including Article 5, which is the substantive change as far as OAL goes. So, do you have any questions about this?
I'm good.
Just one question on C, on page 4, when it says reinstatement of the license of an architect. Is reinstatement a term just used when a license has been revoked, or can it also apply if you want your suspension ended early? Is that also termed reinstatement?
Reinstatement is after, that is following revocation,
Okay.
for sure. Yeah, so your provision says that if someone who's been revoked or surrendered petitions for reinstatement of their license.
Thanks.
And that's not a modification of an existing probation condition that's, can't currently practice. The rehabilitation criteria for licensees would apply. My other client, they are applying the rehabilitation criteria for applicants, for licensees who are surrendered or revoked. That is just maintaining your current provision. So if you've surrendered or been revoked, the rehab criteria applied to you is that of licensees. So that hasn't changed. Anyone else?
Any more comments? Brett? Nope.
Robert did a good job.
Okay.
So what I would like is to, the board to entertain a motion to approve the modified proposed regulatory rulemaking, direct the executive as modified, we made that one change. Direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the executive officer, hold on, wrong motion, different motion. The motion is to approve the proposed modified text for a 15-day comment period, and if there are no adverse comments received during that 15-day public comment period, delegate to the executive officer the authority to adopt the proposed regulatory changes as modified, and also delegate to the executive officer the authority to make any technical or non-substantive changes that may be required in completing the rulemaking file.
So moved.
I'll make a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Secretary call the roll.
Can we have public comment?
Oh, public comment, that's right. Well, actually, Mark, you have anything to say? Okay.
Okay, no public
Okay,
comment?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, roll call. Denise?
Yes.
Tian?
Yes.
Brett?
Aye.
Pascual?
Yes.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Ebony? Robert? Aye. Nilsa? Aye. Sunny?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item N, update of January 23rd, 2020 Professional Qualification Committee meeting. I would like Marcus and Pascual to present that item.
Professional qualifications committee met on January 23rd.
Can you hear me? The Professional Qualifications Committee met on January 23rd to discuss strategic plan items. The board chair, Mr. Gutierrez, will provide a summary for the board of what transpired.
Thank you, Marcus. The PQ Committee, Professional Qualifications Committee, discussed and/or took action on 4 strategic plan objectives, as well as 2 additional items. Strategic plan item number 1, objective to amend the existing law regarding continuing education requirements for license renewal to reflect evolving practice. The PQ Committee recognizes that post-licensure continuing education fosters knowledge and competence in the delivery of architectural services that safeguard the public's health, safety, and welfare, and further that evolving architectural practice with respect to construction technology, methods and materials, building and energy code regulations, evidence-based design and innovation, seismic preparedness, and climate responsiveness, public access, inclusiveness, and diversity, all are impacting the places where Californians live, work, learn, and play, which therefore suggests a refresh of California post-licensure learning is warranted. The PQ Committee determined it will continue to work with staff to assemble empirical data and information to support a legislative amendment of Business and Professions Code regarding licensure renewal, mandatory continuing education requirements. Strategic plan objective number 2 is to provide licensees the opportunity to submit continuing education documentation online to increase efficiency and license renewal. Staff advised the committee it is collaborating with the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Information Services in the development of web-based application for online document submissions and other options for licensees to comply with audits. The committee voted to approve the staff recommendation for the previously mentioned web application. Strategic plan objective number 3, to conduct an occupational analysis, also known as OA, of the profession to reflect current practice. Staff advised that the Office of Professional Examination Services will provide a presentation to the committee on October 2020 detailing the OA process as associated action steps. Circling back, the OA provides the empirical data needed for consideration of continuing education. Strategic plan objective number 4 was to review and amend California code regulations related to reflect current licensing requirements. Staff advised it was coordinating with the Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Affairs Division to formulate language that will be brought before the board later this year. The regulatory proposal will include additional language of related regulations to modernize and align with them with contemporary NCARB practices. The 2 additional items, number 1, which was item number 5, actually discussed the revised model law, NCARB model law. The committee voted to recommend to the board that we send a letter of support to the revised NCARB model law, which, as you know, was included in your packet as handout number B. The final item was to discuss candidate performance on architectural registration examinations. The committee concluded there are no concerns regarding examination performance as the board is on the right track for licensing enough architects to meet California consumer needs. Members approved a motion that directs staff to report the committee's findings to the board. Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah, come later. Marcus, any add to the report? No? Okay. Good. Tara, anything? Procedural thing?
A question, clarifying question. You guys talked about this at your January 23 meeting. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. I just have a clarifying question. The Professional Qualifications Committee discussed the NCARB model law at its January 23rd, 2020 meeting, but the provisions we have before us are dated February 18, 2020. Did you have a different version than what is before the board today?
To answer your question, there was a draft, which was a predecessor to the one that everyone has now in their packet.
And those provisions are the same?
Pardon me?
Those provisions are the same? The draft is reflected in this final?
They've been upgraded. Actually, the Model Law Task Force met 2 weeks after the PQ committee, further polished up the 2 drafts, which are copies that were included in the packets.
So, go ahead.
Nope, I think we're fine. Okay.
You okay? So we can be specific, said that was based on the draft version. However, before you, we have the latest version today, and it will be still on our agenda today too, as well. So we don't need action on this. So just for information items. Yeah, so Sylvia, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I think what you've accomplished at the PQ committee is to be commended. It's taken us, I mean, as the board knows, we've had this discussion about the continuing education format, if you will, and even the subject matter has been under a lot of scrutiny internally to the board. However, each time that we've brought it up, we've been told in various different ways about how the legislators who created this law and also continue to really sponsor it had really been focused on one thing and one thing only. And we believe that's because the subgroup, the special interest group that believes that ADA is the all-important continuing education subject, has been the strongest to date. So, therefore, if the board itself just simply says, well, we think that the whole educational opportunities for architects is changing due to the changing practice itself and due to the changing environment around us, it's not strong enough. So I really, really appreciate that you want to do this occupational analysis first, because that is factual. And I think it will provide a lot of substance to support our knowledge that continuing education should be multidisciplinary, if you will. So I really appreciate that. When I read that, I was like, yes, go team. We can, let's finally do this and do it right. So I really think I appreciate the direction
So
that you're recommending.
since we have two new members, I want to give one sentence update.
Can I respond to that? I should also point out that the occupational analysis that the California board will do comes after the completion of the NCARB occupational analysis. So there'll be lots of empirical data that'll be surfacing.
So as a former chair and the current vice chair for the PQ committee, our objective was really enhance what we should learn in modern day practice. We're not undermining any current requirement like ADA. We are thinking, and how can we make this accessibility even better in its spirit? So I think the board has done really visionary work. I hope this will carry on. And I know it's not easy to have a law changed, but I think we should have a parallel process. We can be rejected, should not stop our effort. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Any more discussions? Okay. So next item is the LATC report, and Trish Rodriguez will do the report, and we also have a member here, so we will have a good conversation.
The LATC held its meeting on February 5th at Southwestern College in Chula Vista. During the meeting, we discussed the regs as they're presented in agenda item 0.2 regarding the updates to the abandonment of application, the retention of candidate files, and application for licensure following examination. The way this came about is as staff was working on our retention schedule, it was determined that there wasn't clear definition on the abandonment of the application. So what the language does in 2611 specifically, it clearly identifies what to do with an eligibility application for 1 year. If somebody doesn't submit all of their qualifications within that period, then it's determined to be abandoned. And then once somebody's fully qualified, they have 5 years and to take their license application. Furthermore, in the retention under 2611.5, that was recommended that we add that so that we can then continue to maintain the candidate records and transfer it over to their license file. And then additional clarifying language was just added to the final section 2615, application for licensure following examination. So the committee recommends to the board that these proposed changes that are here before you, we request your approval.
Andy, anything else to it?
No, I think Trish stated it quite clearly.
Okay, just observations, Laura. The board regulates both. It is a subcommittee to us. So I like to see the potential to align with the two practice into almost not identical, but system-wise are very similar. So each time we update a document, we engage a discussion, we will benefit both boards. So I hope the staff start thinking about that, yeah. Okay. Say something.
Yes, no, that's a good point. We do try to look and try to align as much as possible between the board and LATC, understanding they're different professions and have different needs, but we will go back and look at the board's regulations in this area. I'm not sure what we have, actually, so we will have to take a look and see whether maybe we need regulations or some clarifications. That's a good point.
Any more comment? No. Okay. This item requires no action. Next one.
There's an action.
Oh, we need to adopt that's right, LATC is changing. We also need to adopt.
I don't have the.
So, someone can, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so I think we would recommend a motion to approve the proposed regulatory changes as modified. Direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package. Notice the proposed text for a 45-day comment period, and if no adverse comments are received during that 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, adopt the proposed regulatory changes as modified.
Can someone make a motion that?
Moved.
Okay, good.
Second.
Okay. Secretary, please do the roll call. Oh, for public comment, that's right, public comment. Mark. Sorry. Okay, no comment.
Robert second.
Yes. Robert
He needs to
second.
put his speaker on. Okay, roll call. Denise?
Yes.
Tien?
Yes.
Brett?
Yes.
Pascual?
Yes.
Sylvia?
See?
Ebony?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Nilsa? Yes. Sunny?
Yes.
Great. Okay, item P, National Council of Architecture Registration Board.
I have a couple more under. We're still on.
Oh, one by one, I'm sorry.
So I stepped out on this 2138. Tara, did you
Oh,
cover
yeah.
LATC or can we cover? What do you want to do with this one? Do you want to skip it for now?
Yeah, so we need to go over this. So this is agenda item 03. This is the exact same conversation we just had for the Architects Board, substantial relationship and rehabilitation criteria. Instead of applying rehabilitation criteria for the Architects Board Practice Act, this proposal would apply the relevant Landscape Architects Practice Act provisions. So I'm just pointing out the changes between the two packages, but otherwise, this is the modified text I'm recommending that you approve so that you can address in your package the same concerns that were raised in the veterinary medicine package. Do you have any questions? Okay, so I'd like the board to entertain a motion to approve the proposed modified text for a 15-day comment period, and if there are no adverse comments received during that 15-day public comment period, delegate to the executive officer the authority to adopt the proposed regulatory changes as modified, and also delegate to the executive officer the authority to make any technical or non-substantive changes that may be required in completing the rulemaking file.
So moved.
Second.
Public comment? And should we act on this or we finish the whole thing? I want to make sure.
Item 3, only 03, right?
03.
We have to act on this, okay. Roll call, please.
Great. Roll call. Denise?
Aye.
Tien?
Aye.
Brett?
Yes.
Pascual?
Yes.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Ebony?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
Nilsa? Aye. Sunny?
Yes.
Four and a five, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Four.
0.4.
Yeah.
Review and possible action on legislative proposal to amend Business and Professions Code, Section 5659, regarding local jurisdictions' acceptance of landscape architecture documents. We have a strategic plan objective specifically to educate the different jurisdictional agencies, state and local, about landscape architecture licensure and its regulatory scope of practice to allow licensees to perform duties prescribed within the regulations. So in researching how to go about educating the different jurisdictions, one of the methods we identified after reviewing Business and Professions Code 460, which is attached, to add language to Business and Profession Code Sections 5659, inclusion of license number requirement, and it's in blue text at the bottom and reads as follows. This is as it read and approved by the LATC. There's a handout. I guess I'll read it. I'll read the handout. We received additional minor changes from DCA Legal recently. So it should read, such plans, specifications, and other instruments of service shall not be rejected from the filing with a local jurisdiction on the grounds that the plans, specifications, or other instruments of service were prepared by, signed, dated, and sealed or stamped by a licensed landscape architect as specified under this section. So the committee, again, is recommending the new language for board approval and to help address some of the issues they've been having with the acceptance of the landscape architecture stamp.
Oh, is that a new thing?
So if I could just add, for the members, there's a handout on your table that's slightly modified from what was in the packet.
It's not modified.
So if I could just clarify the handout. So what you see some text here that's stricken, and that was the text that the LATC approved. Upon reviewing this again, I realized that the proposal needed a little bit more massaging to really try and get at this issue. If we just keep it with the local jurisdiction is prohibited from rejecting the plan specifications solely on the grounds of the presence of a stamp of a landscape architect, I think that could open the door for the local jurisdiction to claim it's not just the only ground. We're also rejecting it because we want an architect or engineer to sign it. So we're not trying to complicate the issue. I just wanted to, so I revised it slightly to strike solely. So we're just really telling them that at no time could you use this reason to reject plan specifications or instruments of service. And the reason being just that a licensed landscape architect prepared, signed, dated, and sealed or stamped these documents.
Okay. Tim?
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So, can I have a little background on this? Is it because, I mean, obviously it sounds like there were problems.
Yeah.
So what's the background of this?
I don't know how the year specifically, but this has been a standing item with the LATC, and we tried to address it more than 5 years ago with having a legal opinion prepared, and it's posted on our website to help those that might need a document to present to the jurisdictions in a system. However, the issue seems to be continuing in that sometimes a landscape architect stamp, it continues not to be accepted just solely based on the fact that it's a landscape architect.
Okay, so thanks for that. That really helps. I figured as much. But for example, I know that a lot of jurisdictions have a rule that says if for example, a retaining wall on a site, on an exterior retaining wall, right? If an exterior wall exceeds, I don't remember what it is.
3 or 4 feet.
Yeah, 3 or 4 feet, then it has to be signed and stamped by a structural engineer or a civil engineer.
Right.
So anything below that, a landscape architect or an architect could sign and stamp it. Now, I'm just curious, from the two of you, if a set of landscape plans are done, and we as an architect stamp it, it probably would be fine. The jurisdiction would probably not reject that. But are you saying even when a legitimate licensed landscape architect tries to stamp a set of drawings that are clearly landscape-oriented, they are still not accepted sometimes?
That's my understanding.
If I can just add some clarification.
Yes, please,
to it.
Sandy.
And I'm just going to throw out an example. Let's assume for a second that it's a park project. And the park project was designed and the construction drawings were completed by a licensed landscape architect. Let's also assume that for whatever reason there was no civil engineering that was required, that all the grading and drainage was prepared by the landscape architect. Let's also assume for a second that that there was no architect involved in the project. It was solely prepared by the landscape architect. There has been instances where the building official has not accepted those plans without having a civil engineer or an architect sign those plans, which would mean that the landscape architect would then have to go and retain the services of an outside consultant who was not involved in the creation of those drawings, which is technically against the law, and have them sign it just so it can be submitted to the building official. That's what is really at crux with this particular issue, is that we want to make sure that the building officials realize that if a landscape architect is operating within the confines of what he is licensed to do, that then the building official should be able to accept those drawings. I may not have explained that quite right, Tara, but
I think you're very clear. It's sort of like you're the Rodney Dangerfield of the design professions or something.
okay,
Yeah, no
I never
respect.
considered it like that, but I get no respect.
May I make a,
Yeah.
Okay, yes, Brett.
I have a question for Tara. When I read the, and maybe I misunderstood you, but I read the language in blue on the handout today, starting with such plans. It seemed to me, unless I misunderstood you, that the word solely really belongs there, because aren't you trying to say that if everything else is right about the landscape architect's plans, for example, it doesn't show a retaining wall of 5 feet, that if everything is good about the plans, that the building official shouldn't reject it solely on the grounds that there's a stamp only by a landscape architect. And so in that sense, solely seems to belong there.
So I drafted this initially, and I was thinking solely on the ground, because there may be other really
Exactly.
important reasons why they
Like a
would
retaining
reject
wall
it.
of 5 feet, yeah.
On the other hand, I believe that that creates an opening for the local jurisdictions to claim additional grounds to reject it, such that they're
Well-
still denying these documents, even though they should accept them because they are being presented by licensed professionals.
I hear you.
My point is, if we remove solely, we are saying you cannot use this ground ever, because as long as the plans are prepared pursuant to the requirements of this section, you can't reject it for that ground. There may be other grounds that they could claim, but for this ground,
Right.
that's it.
Uh-huh.
I just didn't want to create
I hear you.
that gap.
May I have a suggestion, though?
Yeah.
I mean, I get the point and why you're concerned, but I think the concern can be dealt with by keeping the word solely in there, but adding something at the end, saying something to the effect of, provided, however, that, and then deal with your concern in the provided, however, that it not give the building official more authority than we want them to.
I don't know how to write that, and I'm trying to keep it succinct. So if you have another,
I'll jot
Specific.
something down.
yeah, that might help. I I'm just thinking in terms of what does the rest of the Practice Act say? It talks about grounds for discipline, and it just talks about that ground. There may be other grounds, but for that reason,
So again, just to repeat your concern, it's that the word solely would mean that, would you repeat that again?
the word, using
If you
just
kept
the word
solely.
solely,
Mhm.
they could reject the plans for other reasons that are effectively the same problem, but couched in a different way.
Okay.
So as long as they have more than one reason to reject it, they could still effectively reject it for the stamp. As long as they have two reasons to reject it, one of them could be the stamp. Because then it's no longer solely on the ground. So I'm trying to just say, this can never be the reason that you're rejecting it, period.
Mhm. Mhm.
That way, if they are rejecting it, it's for another reason entirely, not related to the licensure status of the individual submitting them.
Great.
I initially agreed with Brett, but as I think about it, as you just said, I think by eliminating solely, it just means as long as the landscape architect signs off on plans within their discipline, there's just no basis to reject it because you don't like landscape architects or their role in the project. That just can't be any reason. So the way it is now, that can't even be one of three reasons. You just can't do that as a building official. So I think striking solely helps emphasize that fact, in addition to what you just said. So it is a little bit awkward, but I think striking it is the best way to do it.
Okay.
The second point I had was just since, what was it, 460 or whatever applies to all licensed businesses and enterprises and vocations under DCA, just from a political getting the regulation passed, I know sometimes where you have statutes that broadly protect a whole group of local entities or whatever, when you try and get something specific for yourself, everybody else says, well, gee, I'd like that for my profession too. So do other vocations under DCA have something like this in their statutes? Or will this be something that will cause them to come say, well, we should have that specifically in our statute too, and now you've got 12 agencies and interest groups who are pressuring the legislature, and it might slow down our process. Is that a concern, or just something to have to deal with politically, so to speak?
I'm not concerned with it. I think that if they are able to demonstrate a problem that is similar to what landscape architects are experiencing, then perhaps the legislature should take a look at it and see if those licensed professionals need this type of protection as well. Whether or not it would slow down our proposal, I doubt it, because most likely, since you guys aren't in sunset anymore, this is going to get tucked into another business and professions code bill. And to the extent other boards are reading our language, they could, request the same language be dropped in their sections as well. But if you adopt a recommendation to the legislature with this language, we could get it there and potentially have it, if the legislature agrees to include this in a bill, it would be implemented or effective January 1, 2021. There is no delay. I mean, the only delay would be, I think, explaining to the legislature why this is necessary. If others are doing it also, they're going to have to make the same argument. But most likely, this is going to be in a larger bill, and there's going to be other burning fires in that same bill. So I don't think this would be the holdup.
I would just add that we're past our deadline for submitting for omnibus bills for this year. It doesn't mean we can't still, but if it were to prove it may be included this year, it's more likely it would be next year, so maybe one more year. But we could do some outreach to other boards if that is the case and see whether they have a similar issue and whether they want to expand it, which could help, chances for the proposal.
So if no further discussion, I'd like to give Brett 5 minutes to work on the rewording. And let's move to item number 5, and we come back to item number 4.
So before I move on, as part of the educating the different jurisdictions, the language was just one of the methods that we identified. And we discussed at our meeting, incorporating additional information in the building officials guide that the board has, in specifically the chapter dedicated to landscape architects. So we're working on that as well. And
Okay.
then just finally,
Number 5.
Do you want me to do this?
yeah, go ahead.
So this was an item that was on the board's December agenda, and so there's no content in the packet. It's just a verbal update. The board approved statutory language to allow LATC to implement the fingerprint requirement. This language was included in the board sunset bill last year, but I inadvertently left it out of the Landscape Architect Practice Act. So Senate Business and Professions Committee did agree to take this language, so it will be introduced in an omnibus bill this year. So we shouldn't have any delay in implementation.
No action, right? No actions? Okay. Any questions for Laura? Fingerprint? No? Okay.
Do you want to give them more time? We can go on to NCARB.
Let's do NCOB. I'm extending 10 more minutes to Brett and Tara. Laura, why don't you do the NCOB? P.
I'm sorry, I missed the last statement, and we're ready. If you
Already?
want to address
Yeah,
that.
we'll come back. Now, we're going to do number 4, Trish. So any proposed language?
Well, after talking to our board attorney and after her looking at some of my language, I've been more convinced that we should keep the attorney's language that's in blue without changes.
Okay. All right. Tara, you prevailed.
Okay, so I would like the board to consider a motion to recommend this legislative proposal to the legislature for enactment.
I
Who
second.
seconded? Okay, Yota, let's call the roll.
Roll call. Denise?
Yes.
Tian?
Yes.
Brett?
Yes.
Pascual?
Yes.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Ebony?
Aye.
Robert? Nilsa? Aye. Sunny?
Okay, motion passes. And Laura is now will resume the discussion of NCOB Regional Summit.
Okay, this is item number P in your packet. NCARB's Regional Summit is next week in Cambridge. Tian, Denise, Nielsa, and myself will be attending the summit, I believe, and Sylvia is attending as an officer in West Carb. So the agenda for the summit is in the packet. Also, the day before the summit starts, there'll be a workshop for all the executives from the 55 jurisdictions that I'll attend. So we have in here the agenda, if anyone has any questions, just for you to look at. But the first item to act on is P2, which is NCARB regional officers and directors. So we have in the packet the information on the candidates for the regional director and the committee members. There's 1 candidate for regional director and 4 candidates for the committee member, and there are 3 committee member spots that are open. So if the board wants to take action on these candidates today, can give direction to the members attending next week for how the board would vote.
Yeah, would you like me to give a summary?
I have a
Because-
question for
Oh, sure, of course.
clarification. As like representing California, does TN have 1 vote for all of us, or how does that work?
Correct. Correct.
Yes, you
Yeah.
want me to answer? Yes, at the delegation meeting, that state as a 1 delegate in voting. And then the second round, I heard maybe Sylvia knows more, when they nominated the officer of that role, then individual votes also count because they tabulates how many votes you get. But I don't know the details,
Okay.
if you need further.
Yeah, I'm going to remember things as I speak about it because the voting is, it's different for every entity. So in this particular case, because it's a regional meeting coming up next week, every region, there's 6 regions. And California is with, you would guess, the Pacific Northwest, Hawaii, Alaska, Guam, and we just got the Northern Marianas Islands or something. Some little dot in the ocean. But they pay as much as California in their dues, which is just kind of crazy, but we're not going to complain as long as they can afford it. So now this Region 6 has become a pretty, it's always been like the biggest region. It's called Region 6. And this particular election is for what they call the Executive Committee of Region 6, commonly known as West Carb, okay? So not always, but from time to time, it is a contested election like it is going to be this year. There are 4, if you look on your item P2, you'll see that there are 4 candidates running, and I'll just give you a very quick rundown of the 4. Tian, of course, would be a member that we would vote for. I mean, I hope. Catherine Fritz is from Alaska, and she ran last year against me. There were 3 people for 2 positions, and all three candidates were women. And 2 of the women got it, and 1 of the women didn't. So Catherine was the one that was not elected last year. So I would tend to think that she would get a sympathy vote this year. The 3rd person, Douglas Sams, is brand new into this process. He's never run for anything before at this West Carb level. So I would say of all of them, he may be the one on hold. Just make him wait another year. And then Corey has been on the executive committee previously, and he really wants to move up in the scheme of things. So I'm thinking that it would be Tian. I would recommend Tian, Catherine, and Corey. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think we all vote individually on this one. Tian, no?
Gina said.
I can't remember.
The first round was delegate, and then the second round, so you should know more.
I don't remember.
We vote individually.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right, because I remember the ballot comes to every one of us,
Yeah.
and then they tally all the ballots.
That's the second round.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important for California to be there, because the more people you can stuff the ballots with, oops, I didn't say that. I meant the more people that show up will have a ballot, will have a vote. So, anyway, and then now Ed Marley is running for regional director again. This is very highly unusual, but what he found out is that if he ran for the next level up into the actual NCAR board, he would be running against one of his dearest friends. See, all these politics do come up. So they talked to each other and he goes, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not running against my best buddy. So he decided to remain regional director, and then nobody is running against him. Anyway, it's complicated, but it sort of makes sense. So if you guys would trust your delegates to go and vote as such, we'd be happy to do so, unless somebody has a different opinion or questions.
Yeah, I trust and want you just to vote for the best people,
Yes.
not symphony vote.
The only thing that I would add is that Doug Sims, he may be new to the cycle.
Yeah.
But I've spent the last few years with him on the Model Law Task Force. He is very astute at what he does in his thinking and vision and consensus building.
Well, there you go. So it's, you read the bios too. They're all very impressive. People with a lot of record of service. Yes.
I think it's definitely a great group, but I'd like to encourage you when you are speaking that they encourage to add more people of color and more diversity into the board itself.
Right.
More women in leadership and
Right.
more people of color, please.
Sure. And
And that's like an NCARB issue, because you go to those conferences, it's kind of scary.
If I can make a comment on that point, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think NCARB does realize they have this problem. They really are trying to increase diversity. I will say the structure in the way they elect their board of directors, it's going to be a long time before that happens. But they did try to get more diverse candidates this year, particularly for the public director position. And so they were hoping to get, I think, more diversity that way, as, at least one representative on the board. I'm not sure that's going to happen.
But I think that having someone from the public be one of the members is not good enough. I think it has to be someone that is an architect that can provide an insight from that perspective versus somebody who is just not just, but is a community member or a consumer advocate.
Yeah.
So again, I'd like to just push for the diversity, and if Sylvia, if you could just kind of relate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The other thing you should note is that Corey and I are the two of the members of the Diversity Collaborative, and we are having a meeting at this forum where we're going to try to input something, and I know you're trying to get on it. I'm trying to get you on it, on that committee, and we will keep working on it.
Did you, other than last year, did you meet it again? Or that was just the one meeting you guys had?
One meeting, we've had telecom meetings, and we're going to have another face-to-face. Exactly. You might show up. You should just, yeah.
I'm going to show up. If I get arrested, please, all of you.
Niels, I just want to respond a little bit on behalf of my experience. So NCOB is trying to be responsive and do the best that they can, but they only take people from the regional or from each jurisdiction. And when I mentioned to the president, Chris Cotton, and she said she was doing really tangible things to reach out. She even borrowed the experience of Equity by Design, which is Raza Sen, which is a colleague of mine. So they have been make very conscious effort. Yeah.
No, I agree. And they started a committee, but it's just a committee for the sake of having a committee, because if they only met once, they're really not doing and carrying the mission that they're set out to do. So they have to meet more than just one time to move the agenda along.
They might want to start thinking outside of the box. I know they only pick from people that are sitting on their state boards, but that might not be working.
So do we vote in order to vote for certain people, or we just kind of give you our blessing and hope you do the right thing based upon what we talked about today when you vote?
I think you could do either.
Yeah, you could do either. I remember previous board meeting we did either. So if you feel strongly, I urge you a vote. So we don't need a second thoughts at the meeting.
I'm going to show up to the meeting, even though I'm not invited.
She doesn't mean the Region 6 meeting, she means the Diversity Committee meeting, which I really encourage you to do.
Yes.
And I'll just pretend I don't know you, okay?
So why I put this decision on the vice president. What do you think? Shall we vote on this, or we just let the delegate decide and
All right, if somebody wants to make a motion, they should.
make vice president work?
So we either have the opportunity to get one consensus among the board, or we can also take your input and vote individually as we see fit. So is there any motion on the table of anyone wanting to make a recommendation of a slate of folks?
Okay, before we entertain a motion, Denise, I think that we may find out interesting things at the meeting, because they are going to make some speeches. And so if we hear some real commitment to the issues that we've been talking about today, perhaps we will make our decision then. So perhaps it might be better.
That's good too, but their letter of interest should also start to
That's
address
true.
what their intention is. Yeah, go ahead.
Just as a suggestion, I think the delegates who are attending next week have heard the feedback from the board. And I think what Sylvia pointed out, you're going to see these people up close and personal there. And you may be moved by what they say or they don't say. And I would trust that, you use that judgment to make your decision and carry the vote for California.
So it sounds to me like we have a consensus where we can make the determination once we're there. And I don't think we're going to need an action item.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, thank you. And the second item on the NCOB Regional Summit.
Okay, so the next item, there are 3 resolutions that will be discussed at the regional summit. The first 2 are included in your packet, and the third one was sent as a handout. So we can maybe just go through them, starting with Resolution A, which is NCARB Certification Guidelines, Qualifications for Educational Alternative. So So there's a summary in here, let's see, a memo from John Baker, and then the language of the resolutions. So I think this resolution, the next one, well, I guess we'll just start with this one. It makes kind of, I would say, some minor changes to the process by which NCARB recognizes educational alternatives. Yeah.
If you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I can speak for Laura as well. In terms of the NCARB effort is try to clarify that particular term. They used to use architecture-related major, then can qualify for certain education credit. And they had to get into hard time to justify which one, so many different degrees, majors, that could say it's architecture-related. So now the NCARB want to take on the responsibility to actually look at the curriculum and determine are they architecture-related. So the new requirement is based on the coursework you take, not based on the degree you own. So that's the essence of the change. Yeah. So I personally feel this is a very logical move. I think we need, on this, we need.
Would need a motion on this
You
one
would
if
need a
the board
motion.
would like to support.
Yeah, because we feel better have a motion on. Yeah.
The way I read this is there's been some alternative pathways introduced to acquiring an NCARB certification.
Called experience-based, education alternatives, and twice of a practice experience. That's part
Only
of it.
for an NCARB certification. That's all.
That's
this is
right,
for.
yeah. Oh,
Right,
okay. That's important
So I think that
clarification.
distinction needs to be
Okay.
made, as well as I think that paragraph A preserves the California multiple pathways.
Thank you for the clarification, yes. So if someone can make a motion, just state we will support the resolution 2020 A, and then we can act accordingly at the meeting.
I'd move that we adopt NCARB Resolution 2020A.
Second?
Okay, roll call.
Yes. Denise?
Yes.
Tim?
Aye.
Brett?
Aye.
Pascal?
Yes.
Sylvia, yes. Ebony?
Aye.
Robert? Yes. Ilza is away. Sunny?
Yes.
Motion passes?
All right. Do you want me to do the next one?
You do interior.
Okay.
no.
So the next resolution is 2020-B. This is sunset of an existing NCARB resolution, which called for the opposition to interior design licensing. That was a resolution from 2001. The thinking in the profession has changed, and they would like to eliminate this existing resolution.
So a question on this one, I mean, from what I understand about this, is just to say that different jurisdictions have begun to incorporate different laws for interior designer, practice laws, I should say. And I guess this opposition just sounds like it's a bit outdated because it's no longer a universal opposition. Nevada has
A
enabling.
multidisciplinary board.
Exactly,
Mhm.
and I understand a few other states do as well, and each state may, every state may, not every state, but states may fall along the same lines, so I think that's why they're doing this.
Okay, so I like responded, and before my response, I like call attention of our public member, Mark. So this is the NCARB's taking on position, and that position is currently in line with our specific jurisdiction, and we do not have licensed interior design profession. As you know, the building official just came here as a, how do we call it, as a discipline or as a licensure, as a licensed profession. So if Mark, you have anything from AIA, can educate us before we vote?
Hi, thank you. Mark Christian with AIA California Council. I don't know if I can give this board any recommendation on how to vote on this. I know in California, while there is not a licensure for interior design, there is a state-sanctioned nonprofit group that certifies interior designers, and they've spoken to the board before, the California Council for Interior Design Certification. They're up for sunset review in 2021, and we're working with them. AIA California historically has opposed efforts to create a practice act for interior design. That's what AIA California has done, and the California Architects Board historically has opposed the practice act efforts, as has CalBO, the California Building Officials. Yet we all support the certification for it in its existing framework. If any of these statements help inform members of this board on how to proceed, good, but I'm not prepared to offer any recommendation. California legislature is not bound by the positions of NCARB. I don't think the California Architects Board is bound by the positions of NCARB.
So a vote no would imply that we have a practice different from NCOB's, this particular resolution's direction, right?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
if
no,
the
it's
board
just-
were to vote to oppose this resolution, the board would be saying that they continue to oppose the licensing of interior designers, regardless of what jurisdiction, just in general. And so I think, as Sylvia said, the reason that the NCARB probably wants to go forward with this resolution is the fact that a lot of the states now do license interior designers. They have the multidisciplinary boards, and so, like, the chair of the Nevada board is an interior designer. So.
Okay, that's warrants a discussion. Yes,
Yeah,
Robert?
in one of the public member teleconferences, it was described as, this was originally passed years ago when the architecture committee was, very protective. Nowadays, something like this might even be antitrust relative, and just from their politically correct way, rather than say repeal, they just say let it sunset, so it's no longer our official position that we oppose. So I think we should definitely support that, because that's certainly not our position either, to oppose their licensure.
Yeah. Pascal, yeah.
I think this is an opportunity for California to walk its talk. There are certain states that have events that California does not attend because of discriminatory laws, and to have a law that we abide by that prevents a profession from becoming or having the opportunity to become licensed, I think is discriminatory. So this is an opportunity for us to vote yes and sunset that law or regulation.
Any other discussions? Are we?
Can I,
good?
can
Yeah,
I
yeah,
move
please.
to support the sunset of that one?
Second.
Okay. Any discussions and any comments from public? No? Okay. We can do the roll call.
Okay, roll call. Denise?
Aye.
Tan?
Aye.
Brett?
Yes.
Pascual?
Yes.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Ebony?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
Nilsa? Aye. Sunny?
Yes.
Okay, so Resolution 2020C is amendment and restatement of the NCARB legislative guidelines and model law, model regulations. We sent this as an attachment as it was updated after the board materials were compiled. Pascal, do you want to maybe give a summary of where
Sure.
NCARB is with this?
So, quite in simple form, what this initiative is, the revised model law, is for the last 4 years, the task force has been working to amend this, and restate NCARB's legislative guidelines and model law, model regulations to modernize and update the document relevant to today's practice. There was, when the first drafts came out on the revised model law, it was misinterpreted by many boards, thinking that if they voted for this revised model law, that it meant adoption of the model law. It does not mean that. The model law and regulations is a resource for member boards, which will decide whether to adopt some or all of the updated provisions within the jurisdictions of their own documents. So boards can adapt and adopt the model law if they see fit. A vote in favor of the resolution represents support of the proposed national policy and aspirational goal of the regulation. Approval of this resolution does not require member boards or laws and regulations to be identical to those provisions. And approval of this resolution by membership would not change the path to licensure for any jurisdiction. So that sort of perceived threat that member boards felt that their regulations were going to be negatively impacted or impacted against what they do, the way they do it, is not the case. This is just simply an opportunity to say the model law and regulations that are currently in place are not relevant to today's practice. Therefore, it's time to revise the model.
Yes, Robert?
Maybe Pasquale can answer this. Looking at the goals of modernization, they include organizing the law in the logical profession of a candidate follows on the path to licensure, and that philosophically they recommend approach in terms of definition of the practice to include elements central to architecture, not to prescribe what's not architecture. To what extent does California law follow this proposed paradigm in our laws and regulations, if at all, would you say?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, the modernization goal is in part to have the relevant licensing information in logical progression a candidate follows on the path to licensure. Do our laws do the same thing, or do we follow?
California does do that through multiple pathways.
No, that's not what I thought I was trying to.
What page are you on?
Well, on the written part, it's 9.
I thought your question was, does California allow it?
It's not allowing, it's a framework or a formula, it looks like, for how you wrote out the language of the statute.
Well, if you go to the model law, and you look at, not the regulations, because you go to the law first and then the regulations, and you look at, let me find it here. It's regulation 3, it's model law 301.
Page 17.
Is it page 17 of the law?
Yep.
And I think the answer is there, Robert.
So if I could add, I think what Robert is asking is whether a California statute follows what NCARB is trying to do in terms of making the statute logical so someone can follow it along through the licensing process, and it lays it out in the step. And I do think California statute is for the most part organized in that manner.
And what about they asked about, it said they wanted to improve the definition of the practice of architect philosophically by defining the elements that are essential to architecture rather than attempting to prescribe what is not architecture. Does California law follow that same philosophical approach, is my question.
I believe you can find that in the California Practice Act.
We do define what it is rather than what it is not.
But to answer your first question, Robert, if you go to section 301 of the law,
The model law?
yeah, the model law, which is page 17, as Mr. Sonny Ward here pointed out, the initial licensure qualifications, paragraph 1A, it says, provide documentation satisfactory to the board that the applicant has, 1, successfully completed an approved education program, 2, successfully completed an approved experience program, and 3, successfully completed an approved examination. That is the same pathway that we do in California.
The B's.
Now, the only question and doubt that may come up is the first one that says successfully completed an approved education program. But if you go to the regulations, that paragraph in Regulation R301 provides the board the authority to define what an education program is and gives the board the opportunity and jurisdiction to make the experience equivalent of an education. So our multiple pathways are not impinged by this model law.
In a document like this, would you state, like, successfully completed an improved education program as defined or whatever? Would that be necessary to reference that? No? So
You're saying
to reference in this statement, in this section?
Model law, so the individual boards would state that.
Okay,
You have the law and then you have the regulations.
okay.
That's the intent of model laws, the states adopts in their own context, yeah.
So anyway, my point was that the model law does not cast any shadows or conflict on the California Practice Act.
No, it's inclusive of us.
So it says possible action, which means we don't need to take an action necessarily?
I think this will be voted upon at the annual meeting, correct?
Yeah, we
Which
prefer
California
have
will
a
not
meeting.
be in presence
Right.
because of Texas's
So it'd be nice if it's.
regulations. That's why the PQ committee requested that the board send a letter of support for the model law, since we will be absent from that annual
Yeah,
meeting.
I would prefer, Denise, if we can, is having a vote to support the model law.
We could take that here, or it could be, I was going to place it on the June agenda, because the June meeting will still be before the NCARB annual meeting.
Oh,
So,
okay.
But I think.
we can do it now, yeah.
You want to know?
Yeah.
Okay. So, we do now. Anyone want to entertain a motion?
So moved.
I second.
Okay, is it clear, the motion? Just
Do we have to
support
spell it
of
out?
the model law. So, roll call, please.
We have to spell it out.
Oh, you have to spell out, okay, so.
Yeah, I think
Carrie.
it's just clear for the record, if you can tell us in your motion what you're moving.
I am moving to, for the board to send a letter of support for this action item.
Do you want to say, send it, just say board supported item, I think is adequate? Staff will handle accordingly, yeah,
Is that good enough, Tara?
yeah, let's do that.
Thank you.
And I second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Okay, roll call. Denise?
Yes?
Tian?
Yes.
Brett?
Yes.
Pascual?
Yes.
Sylvia? Ebony?
Aye.
Robert? Nilsa? Aye. Sunny?
Yes.
Thank you.
Does NCARB allow a vote by proxy?
No.
Okay, we are doing very well in terms of time, so you can get on your plane if Laura decide not talk to 1 hour or 2 hours, so, okay?
I never talk a lot. So we are on the executive officer report, which is item Q. I'm just going to go over the highlights. But to start with, just a few things that aren't in the report, some outreach. NCARB had an orientation for new board member executives, new board members. It was for NCARB, CLARB, and then NCIDQ, which is the interior design group, and the engineering group. So Trish and one of their committee members, and Sunny and I attended the orientation earlier this month. That was very informative. I also attended an event with NCARB and AIA Los Angeles earlier this week with the outreach to emerging professionals on licensure requirements, and I'm attending an education summit also with NCARB and AIA on Saturday at Woodbury University. So let's see, starting on page 1 of the report, we have we have the update on the PQ meeting, which we already discussed. We will schedule an REC meeting to take up the item the board referred today, and we have not yet scheduled another communications committee meeting. We had a budget update, so I'm not going to go over that. Business modernization, starting on page 2. This is the process that will lead us to a new IT system and online services. Our stage 2 documents were approved by agency, I believe, earlier this week, so we're moving forward in this process. It's going pretty well.
Laura, can I interject? So, Kimberly mentioned that they're implementing shareware or shares.
Yeah.
She said is there can be a module fitting to a Breeze, and we are none of those. How this relates to our business practice here?
So we're not on Breeze, but the share well site I think she was talking about was so the boards and bureaus could track regulations, so it'll allow all boards to use it
regulations,
regardless
okay.
of whether we're on Breeze.
Okay.
Let's see, we are just finishing up the latest issue of the newsletter, so that'll go out in the next few days, I think. We released the building information guide, provided you copies today. There's a status of all our regulations here in the packet.
Question?
Yeah.
On the publications, there's an item here that says that the board's outreach posters have been sent to, for distribution to community college and county veteran service offices, and that posters are available on a reduced 8.5 by 11 format. Where can we see that, or can we be sent digital copy of that?
Sure, I'll send that out with some follow-up information from this
Great,
meeting.
thank you.
there aren't any questions on the regulations, we'll move on to our we have social media statistics on page 4, and then going on to our ARE and CSE statistics, starting at page 4 and 5.
Any reasons,
Thank you.
minus 71%?
Thank you for stopping at this page. As you know, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
a very,
Oh, I think First Hand wants to go back
okay.
to the social media, why the minus for 71? That's a good question. I'm not sure entirely the reason. I will say that I have in the past spent more time doing posting myself to Facebook, and I haven't been recently, and I've been relying on
Okay.
public affairs, so I will dedicate more time to it to try to increase it.
And you know, that's a conversation we've had at the Communications Committee several times, and I don't think it's the expectation that Laura, as our executive officer, be the one posting. There's a staff person designated within the department to do communications in addition to support from DCA's Public Affairs Office, right? So perhaps we can relay information from the board that we want to continue to see social engagement on social media.
And then on to the statistics.
right, onto the statistics on page 5. It appears that California is not doing well, and now this is the second year in 5.0, so we should at least be getting better, and it seems like we're getting worse. So
In terms of?
in terms of fail and pass rates.
California compared to other
Yeah.
jurisdictions.
Compared to other states, and I just wondered whether it's a university issue, a student issue, or what the issue is, because we're not doing ourselves justice by not having the students pass, because then we're not having the architects that we need out in the world doing business.
So we had a talk about this a few times, if anyone wants to jump in, Pascal's. So the two factors we notice is that we have not just a diverse background architect, we have diverse background of candidates who are taking the exam. So that's very different from other states. And two, we have a huge quantity, many people taking it. And so the net gain of a qualified architect is sufficient. So that's why we have not seen a particular concern we need to take a specific measure, because the net gain architects is doing very well.
To answer your question in a different way, Neil, so the statistics can be read in different ways because they're not apples to apples comparisons. California has 22,000 architects,
Yeah.
the largest contingency in the nation. And when you start to run those calculations, how many pass, how many fail, as against to like Wyoming, who has, I don't know,
10.
a handful, you know, those numbers get kind of wonky. The bottom line, when the PQ discussed this and looked into it with the help of staff, was that we actually have an excess number of architects in the state to service the number of consumers that we have. So that, and it's remained constant over the years. And these numbers, these passing rates, if you go back and you start analyzing them and you draw sort of a little comparison chart, they pretty much are just remain constant. They go up and down a little bit, but there's no major spikes or pitfalls in the testing process. So with that, we were confident in analyzing this, that we have enough, more than enough architects to service the consumer. To compete against the nation in those numbers isn't going to be a true sense when you just look at the statistics, because of the varying number of the population that we have and the number of licensees that we have.
I think California is probably the second largest state in the union, and I don't know that putting a limit on, well, we have enough is good enough for me, because we're not diverse enough in terms of the architectural population. We need to have more architects of color and women, and I don't know if the ones that are taking the test are those that are failing. And I don't want to just put it aside because we have enough.
I don't think it's been put aside. I think it'll be continue to be monitored. I would recommend that anyone on the board look at a publication that's titled NCARB by the Numbers, and you will see a dramatic rise in licensed women architects. So years ago, I mean, it's a dramatic increase on the percentages of women. And if you walk into any architectural large firm today or any school, you will see sometimes I have seen more women than men, or more females than males in these studios.
It's
So,
trending. It is definitely trending. My office has 60% women now, and 4 of the people in my office that passed the exam, because they want me to sign their architecture license, 4 of them passed last year, and they were all women.
But are they women of color?
What I have
Onward.
not seen, what is not highly represented is the black population.
Or Latino population.
I have not,
So people of color are still
not seen
being
that.
left behind, and I just want to make sure that we're pounding on the table
Dramatic rise
to
in
ensure
Asian and
that
Latinos,
those
but not
opportunities are
blacks.
being sought
Okay.
and we're provided.
Good.
But quickly, can I just
I think-
add for the data?
Oh, you
Wait.
want to go first? So, we have Sunny and Brett. And Ebony. And Laura.
I think that we could get much better information on these breakdowns for the pass-fail rates. I think we read too much into these really simplistic numbers. I asked a couple people at NCARB last week while I was there if there was more valuable research that's available. And it's clear that the information that they're sort of putting out is information that the universities are asking for and that sort of states in general are asking for. But the data's there, it's just not being crunched. So we need, for instance, when you go and you take the ARE, it asks a lot of questions. I'm not sure as far as ethnicity, if it's asking ethnicity when you take the test, but I know it's getting gender, and I know it's getting university. But what's missing from this data, so for instance, on all the people that are taking the test in California, for instance, is we can look at the individual university pass-fail rates and get that information. But what we can't get from this is how many people went to school outside of state and moved into California and took the test on our name, and so they may live in California now, but they may have moved here for a job. They may be from Florida, they may be from New Jersey, and so it's giving us, we're just not getting the whole picture, and I think we could ask a few more questions, and NCARB is going to be very helpful, I think, if we reach out to them to help us further dissect it, because I do know that it's something that they're not themselves doing yet either.
Yeah. I also wanted to know, because I think I've asked this before, of from the data, what, for those that go to universities versus those who don't, and what that pass-fail rate looks like. And I would like that to be standing in our reports.
I've heard some board members talk about the low pass rate maybe having something to do with the diversity of the applicants. I didn't quite understand that. Is that sort of stating that the great diversity means we have people whose whose first language is not English, and therefore they're having trouble with the education or with the questions on the exam, or does the diversity refer to something different? Because if it's a matter of not having English as a first language, that's worth a little bit of discussion, perhaps at another one of our board meetings.
I think Sunny brought up a very excellent point in that those numbers are not being crunched. We know what the pass rate is versus the fail rate. We know that. That's empirical evidence. Everything else is theory. Everything else is a guess. It could be this,
Yes.
it could be that, it could be the other. We don't know. We don't have that information. We don't have that hard data.
And we can get it.
So those numbers are actually acquired. We won't be able to make those types of decisions and analysis.
I agree.
And compared to other states and jurisdictions, we also have multiple pathways that don't exist in other places that are allowing people that could not take the test in other jurisdictions to take the test in ours.
Okay.
But again, we don't have the specific data on that, but that's happening.
Thank you.
When I was on the IPAL task force, the Integrated Path to Licensure, we did the survey of the schools that would be willing to participate in the IPAL program, whereas they bring the exam into their curriculum. And that committee asked the schools when they applied what their ethnicity breakdown was by staff as well as by students. That was the first time I ever saw any kind of information like that. But it's just not carried forward. It's not being collected right now.
Okay, Laura.
Last comment I want to make is that I have asked NCARB, because I've asked for this information 3 years ago, and now we're in 2020, it still hasn't come.
I would
Okay,
say,
Laura.
just to add to what Sunny said, I think NCARB has very recently said, I think it was at this orientation and in a meeting I had with them, that they are going to push deeper into this data and do better research, so I think we can work with them to get it. I would also suggest that if the board members still want to address this issue and PQ has decided that it's not an issue in terms of the licensing population, perhaps it's an outreach issue that communications committee could work on in terms of reaching out to the schools to talk about how they're preparing students and if they're talking to them about the licensure process and the exam.
I think we did ask that question, and I think a lot of the universities don't want to do that because that affects their admission. They don't want to say, oh yeah, 25% of our population failed. So they don't really want to be forthcoming with that information.
That information's public, though. Yeah. Like,
From
Yeah.
NCARB.
universities are public, and that you can get on the NCARB website, right? We could go on right now and pull that off. I also just want to point out that there's two competing issues here. There's one which is protecting the public by making sure that the candidates that do apply and take the test pass, and that they're able to practice architecture. And the second is more of the sort of emotional, call it a spirit football game of like having the highest or lowest pass-fail rate. So, they're two kind of things, and I think we're all cheerleading our residents and our test takers and everyone to be successful and also be the most diverse candidate pool. But the important thing is that they're not becoming architects if they're not passing the test.
I should probably restate that when the PQ committee took the position that it did, it was based on information that is calculated. We know what the pass rates are. We know what the pass rate and fail rates are. We know that. We know that the number of architects in California consistently over the number of years, that there are a sufficient number of architects servicing and of the consumers of California. So the PQ made its decision that it could only monitor these pass rates and not make any other conclusions or theorize about what the problems are. So that's what the PQ committee decision was. That's how it came about.
I could probably make the assumption that most of the fail rates are not people of diverse backgrounds, because people of diverse backgrounds are not getting into the programs. So I can pretty much surmise that.
Again, that's a theory.
It's a theory.
No, I've asked it at every university. I've asked when we go, how many people of color are in your program? And they always tell me, 3% black, 4% brown. That is a fact. They tell us that because I ask that at every university we go to. It's not something.
I would recommend visit the colleges and see for yourself what's going on.
So, Niu-Zhan, I think we all should thank Laura that put all the information in her report. Because we were thinking about we will do this every so often, not every meeting. So we had a very nice discussion, consider that was the context. So, yeah, great, okay. So, continue?
Continuing on.
Yeah.
So then we have our CSE statistics. Those look better.
Yeah, much better.
And on to page 7, enforcement statistics, enforcement actions. I do want to mention at the top here, I have just a summary that we're using the subject matter expert process now exclusively as a way to use architect consultants. Bob Chase has finished his regular contract process, but we're using him on this contract, and he is in the office to answer regular questions and do some casework. We're also sending cases out. We have, I think, about 14 SMEs on contract. We did have Bob Carter on a contract, but he recently told us he's not going to continue. He's going to pursue something else. So I just want to mention that for the board. And we appreciate his longtime service. Going forward, we've got information on our statistics. And our complaints are up this year, so staff are working hard.
Because there's more work.
Yeah.
All work, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see complaints comparing to prior years, types of complaints we received, and types of actions we've taken. And then after that, on page 13 is a strategic plan update. That's really just a carry forward from the December meeting. I didn't actually intend to keep it in here, but it'll stay now. So we'll keep updating on that. And then LATC information starting on page 17, as we already had the
Talk
LATC
about it.
update. I don't know if we need to walk through any of those.
Nope.
Can I just add one thing? I just
Okay.
wanted to, under personnel, we had Deborah DeLay, who separated from state service on January 30th, and we recruited to fill behind that position, and Courtney Nation, who's here today, she's been our exam analyst since 2014, and so she was hired as the special projects analyst for LATC. It's a promotion, and we'd like to congratulate her.
Okay, go, speed up.
So I think that is it for that report, unless there are any questions. And so moving on to item R is the review of future board meeting dates.
So, we had, Sylvia's gone. We need to wait for her. So we had arrangement of always Northern California, Southern California, Northern California. So I heard just today there's some of interest to moving these location or dates around. Anyone, while waiting for Sylvia, anyone has a strong feeling we should not do this current pattern? Anyone has problems with dates?
I won't be in there in September.
You were not?
The first weekend that they had, it was my brother's wedding, and then I had to be working Washington.
Okay.
If you had it midweek earlier, like the 10th of September, I probably could go, but I know that it's also around the holidays, so it's just September's not good for me.
The whole September is not good for you?
What?
The whole September is not good for you?
say the whole September, but.
Okay, most, no, the 18th is current date.
Right.
The initial
Not
date
good.
was like the 13th or something.
Okay.
The initial date was the 11th, and then it's during the CLARB meeting, which Trish and I attend, so we can't
We did it,
do it that week.
So,
We can continue to revisit.
yeah, we can revisit, we don't need to make any formal decision, yeah. So anyone has a, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to make is that Sylvia wanted to host our holiday dinner, so she thought that we should move the Southern California meeting to September and the September meeting to December, or I guess Southern California to, September, and Bay Area to December, so she can host us for the holiday dinner.
Yeah,
She also suggested moving the December meeting away from a Friday, as that's harder for people during the holiday season. So if we can do more work on the dates and locations and send out an email to members. And Tara has a comment.
I just have a question. I'm just wondering where the LATC is between
I thought there's an intention to miss one meeting, is it?
We're
Is it
still
not?
working on it.
Oh, you're
So
still
until-
working on
Yeah,
it.
it's to be determined.
Yeah, I noticed there's the fall meeting is missing. Okay, let the staff continue work on the meeting dates. If you, the members don't have a huge urge to make a decision today. And we are now sharply 2:30. We must adjourn our meeting. Any last minute comment?
We already talked about the dates.
Oh, dates, yeah. I heard now.
Okay, fine.
You cannot change your mind after this. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Yay, good job. Good job, Jan.
I need one.